My husband slid the divorce papers across the pristine white tablecloth with a smug smile. He looked me dead in the eye and told me I had two choices: accept his pregnant 24-year-old mistress moving into our penthouse, or sign these papers and walk away with absolutely nothing. I picked up my favorite fountain pen and signed on the dotted line without a single second of hesitation. My husband turned pale, snatching the document back and stammering that I had misunderstood. I just smiled, leaving a crisp $100 bill on the table for the waiter. I am Jocelyn, 33 years old, and a senior forensic accountant for one of the largest financial firms in Chicago. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to legally and financially destroy a toxic partner who drastically underestimated your intelligence. The 5-year anniversary dinner at a highly rated Michelin star restaurant in downtown Chicago was supposed to be a celebration of our marriage. Instead, Bradley treated it like a corporate buyout. He arrived 15 minutes late, wearing his custom-tailored Italian suit and that signature arrogant grin he used for his public relations clients. For 5 years, I had played the role of the quiet and supportive wife. Bradley was a CEO who loved the spotlight, while I preferred the shadows of spreadsheets and financial audits. He constantly referred to my job as boring desk work. He never bothered to understand that forensic accountants specialize in uncovering hidden assets fraud and corporate deception. He just liked having a wife who paid the bills in the early days of his startup and kept his domestic life perfectly organized. When the waiter poured our expensive champagne, Bradley did not offer a toast to our future. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. He tossed them onto the table right next to my untouched appetizer. I looked at the papers and then up at his smug face. I am a generous man, Jocelyn. He began leaning back in his chair, like a king addressing a peasant. But we need to face reality. You are 33 and constantly working. Kylie is 24, vibrant and, most importantly, she is carrying my child. Kylie was his newest public relations assistant. I had met her twice at company holiday parties. She was exactly the type of woman Bradley gravitated toward. Flashy, eager for high society validation, and completely dependent on his validation. He took a slow sip of his champagne before delivering what he thought was his masterstroke. She is moving into the penthouse next week. I am willing to let you stay. We can have an open marriage. You get to keep the prestige of being my wife and the comfortable lifestyle that comes with my success. If you cannot accept that, you can sign these divorce papers right now. But let me remind you that if you walk away, you get nothing. My company is booming, and you will be back to living in some cramped apartment. He actually thought he had me cornered. He thought my silence was shocking. He did not know that my silence was the calculated restraint of a woman who had been tracking his fraudulent credit card charges for 6 months. I knew exactly how much company money he had spent on luxury handbags and hotel rooms for Kylie. I reached into my purse and pulled out my Mont Blanc pen. I flipped to the final page of the document he had provided. Without shedding a single tear or raising my voice, I signed my full legal name on the signature line. Bradley dropped his champagne glass. It clattered loudly against the table, drawing stares from the nearby diners. "What are you doing?" he hissed, his confident facade cracking instantly. "You did not even read it." I placed the cap back on my pen with a sharp click. "I read the draft your careless lawyer sent over to my legal counsel last week, Bradley. I know exactly what I just signed." He lunged forward and grabbed the papers, frantically flipping through the pages. The color rapidly drained from his face as his eyes scanned the text. "No, wait," he stammered, a fine sheen of sweat breaking out on his forehead. "You misunderstood the terms. This is the wrong draft." I stood up, smoothing the skirt of my dress. I left a crisp $100 bill on the table for the waiter. I did not misunderstand anything I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm and cold. You are the one who failed to read the specific addendum of our prenuptial agreement. Have a wonderful evening, Bradley. I walked out of the restaurant with my head held high, leaving him scrambling at the table. He had been so eager to intimidate me that he completely forgot the ironclad prenup my lawyer Nathaniel had drafted before we got married. When I returned to the penthouse overlooking the Chicago skyline, I poured sparkling water and sat on the velvet sofa. I had expected the storm. Bradley's pattern was always the same: arrogance first, paperwork later. At 2 in the morning, my phone rang. I waited through 3 calls before answering on speaker. "Jocelyn, tear up those papers," he shouted. "My lawyer used the wrong draft. It includes the infidelity clause." It was not the wrong draft. The clause had been negotiated in our prenuptial agreement 5 years earlier. If Bradley initiated a divorce in order to continue a relationship with a third party, he waived his contractual claim to the penthouse and agreed not to contest my separate ownership. His signature at the restaurant did not magically rewrite the deed at midnight. It activated the waiver and gave Nathaniel the basis to seek immediate enforcement in the divorce case. "You admitted the affair presented the petition and signed the acknowledgement yourself," I said. "Your attorney sent the draft to Nathaniel last week. Nothing happened by accident." "You cannot do this to me," Bradley yelled. "That penthouse is my primary asset. Where am I supposed to live? Where is Kylie supposed to live?" The deed had always been held in my name through the structure disclosed in our prenup. Bradley had lived there and paid some household expenses, but the agreement defined the residence as my separate property if he triggered the clause. A judge would still review voluntariness disclosure and enforceability. Bradley's panic came from knowing that his own emails and restaurant confession supported every element. "You can move into Kylie's apartment," I said. "I hear it is cozy." "Good night, Bradley." I ended the call, but did not block every channel. All future messages would be preserved and routed through Nathaniel. The peace lasted less than 40 minutes. Bradley had always hidden behind his mother when consequences arrived, and Patricia had raised him to believe his status could overpower any contract. I knew she would come to the penthouse believing anger was stronger than a deed. Less than 40 minutes later, the heavy oak doors of the penthouse lobby burst open. I heard the sharp clicking of heels marching down the corridor, followed by furious pounding on my front door. "Jocelyn opens this door right now!" Patricia shrieked from the hallway. "You manipulative little gold digger, open up!" I walked to the door and unlocked it, opening it just wide enough to stand in the frame. Patricia stood there in her expensive silk pajamas and a designer trench coat, her face flushed red with rage. She tried to push past me into the apartment, but I stood my ground. "You have absolutely no right to steal my son's home." Patricia sneered, pointing a manicured finger in my face. "You tricked him into signing that ridiculous prenup. You are going to pack your cheap clothes and get out of his house tonight, or I will have you thrown out. This is my property, Patricia," I said, keeping my voice dangerously level. "Bradley triggered the clause with his own actions. You are currently trespassing." "You are nothing but a glorified secretary," she spat, leaning closer. "You think you are so smart because you play with calculators all day. Bradley is the CEO of a multi-million-dollar public relations firm. He is the elite. You are just the trash he picked up along the way. I am coming inside to pack your bags myself." Patricia shoved her shoulder against the door and tried to force her way inside. I stepped back rather than turn the entrance into a physical fight, pulled out my phone, and called 911 on speaker. "I need assistance at my residence," I told the dispatcher. "A woman I have ordered to leave is attempting to enter by force. I am inside, the door is partly open, and I do not want anyone injured." Patricia stopped pushing when she heard the dispatcher confirm the address. "You would not dare," she hissed. The building's security camera had recorded her arrival, her threats, and the shove against the door. Within minutes, 2 officers and the building manager reached the floor. They did not decide the divorce or enforce the infidelity clause in the hallway. They asked who lived there, whether Patricia had permission to enter, and whether anyone was in immediate danger. I showed the deed listing me as owner, my identification, and the building records showing the penthouse as my residence. I also showed the pending divorce filing, only to explain why Patricia had arrived. The officer made clear that any disputed marital claim belonged in court. For that night, Patricia was an invited guest who had been told to leave and had tried to push past the occupant. "Ma'am, you need to step away from the door," one officer said. "You may contact counsel and pursue any civil claim. You may not force entry after the resident has withdrawn permission." "Do you know who I am?" Patricia demanded. "My son owns this building. This woman is stealing his home." The building manager corrected her. Bradley did not own the building, and Patricia was not listed as a resident or authorized guest. The officers offered to escort her to the lobby. When she slapped one officer's hand away and continued shouting, they warned that another attempt to enter could lead to arrest for trespass or disorderly conduct. Patricia finally moved toward the elevator. Her humiliation did not come from police awarding me property. It came from discovering that her name, money, and volume did not give her the right to cross a threshold after being told no. "You think this house is everything?" she shouted as the doors opened. "It is brick and glass. Bradley's PR company is worth tens of millions. You will not get 1 cent of it." The officers escorted her to the lobby without handcuffs. I closed the door and saved the incident number, security footage, and manager statement for Nathaniel. Patricia was right that the penthouse was only one asset. What she did not know was that Apex Horizon Holdings controlled the master lease on Bradley's headquarters and held much of the debt supporting his agency. She had come to defend an empire without understanding who owned its foundation. Bradley thought he was discarding a boring desk worker. He was about to find out exactly what a forensic accountant can do when she stops playing nice. The morning sun hit the floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown Chicago office, casting a sharp light over my mahogany desk. My firm handled the auditing and financial compliance for several major corporations in the city, including the bank that serviced Bradley's public relations agency. After the circus performance Patricia put on the night before, I arrived at work feeling entirely refreshed. There is a specific kind of clarity that comes when you strip away the dead weight in your life. I poured myself a black coffee and opened the quarterly ledgers. I was deep into analyzing a corporate merger when the frantic clicking of stiletto heels echoed through the quiet marble lobby of the executive floor. My assistant knocked softly on my glass door, looking both alarmed and deeply annoyed. She told me I had a visitor who refused to wait in the reception area. Before I could even respond, the door swung wide open. Kylie strutted into my office as if she were walking a fashion runway. She wore a skin-tight crimson dress that seemed specifically chosen to emphasize the slight curve of her stomach. Her hand rested protectively over her belly, an exaggerated gesture meant to broadcast her pregnancy to the entire floor. But the real star of her ensemble was draped over her forearm, a pristine, limited edition Himalayan Birkin bag. She looked around my minimalist office with a theatrical sigh, rolling her eyes at the stacks of financial reports and legal binders. "So this is where you hide all day." Kylie sneered, her voice loud enough to carry through the open door and into the bullpen of junior accountants outside. "It is exactly as depressing as Bradley described. Gray walls, gray desk, gray life. No wonder he needed to find someone with actual passion." I remained seated, my hands folded neatly on top of my desk. I did not raise my voice or react to the insult. I simply observed her, the way a scientist observes a highly predictable lab rat. "Can I help you, Kylie?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly flat. "You are currently trespassing on a secure corporate floor." She stepped closer to my desk, slamming the Birkin down right on top of a stack of audit reports. "I just came to drop off the spare keys to the penthouse," she announced, dropping a pair of silver keys next to the bag. "Bradley said you might need them to pack up your boring pantsuits. We are hiring an interior designer to tear out all your drab furniture by Friday. I am turning your old home office into the nursery." I looked at the keys and then back at her. Her confidence was staggering considering she was entirely dependent on a man whose empire was currently built on quicksand. She leaned over the desk, trying to force me to look at her diamond necklace. "You really should have tried harder, Jocelyn," she continued, her voice dripping with fake pity. "You are 33 years old. You spent your youth crunching numbers, while I am giving Bradley the one thing you never could, a real family. You are just a boring, discarded ant now, a human calculator he kept around to balance his checkbook. Do not worry, though. I am sure you will find a nice, quiet man who appreciates a woman who goes to bed at 9 o'clock." My colleagues in the outer office were dead silent, pretending to work while listening to every word. They knew my reputation. I was the woman who had personally dismantled a multi-million-dollar embezzlement ring last year without breaking a sweat. They were waiting for me to call security or throw her out. Instead, I looked at her bag. A Himalayan Birkin retails for anywhere between $100,000 and $300,000 on the secondary market, depending on the hardware. Bradley's legitimate take-home salary from his public relations firm, after taxes and our previous joint expenses, could absolutely not cover that purchase without triggering a massive cash flow deficit. "That is a fascinating bag, Kylie," I said, leaning back in my leather chair. "White crocodile, palladium hardware. Very bold choice for a public relations assistant who makes $45,000 a year." Kylie smirked, picking up the bag and stroking the handle. "Bradley bought it for me yesterday to celebrate the baby. He said the mother of his child deserves nothing but the absolute best. He treats me like royalty, Jocelyn, something you would know nothing about." She spun around on her stilettos, preparing to make a dramatic exit. As she turned, her foot caught slightly on the edge of my rug. She stumbled, and her designer clutch spilled open onto the floor. A tube of expensive lipstick, a compact mirror, and a sleek metal credit card scattered across the hardwood. Kylie cursed and knelt to gather the contents of her clutch. A black metal card lay on the floor, long enough for me to see the silver emblem and the last 4 digits. It was an executive expense card issued to Bradley's agency. I did not touch it or photograph private information. I wrote down only what was visible and watched Kylie shove the card back into her bag. "Have a nice life," she said, then marched toward the elevator. The card mattered because my firm performed compliance work for the lender and Dominic's investment vehicle. It did not give me personal permission to search Bradley's accounts during a divorce. The moment Kylie left, I called Nathaniel, disclosed the conflict, and contacted the engagement partner supervising the agency review. "I observed a corporate card in Kylie's possession," I said. "She stated Bradley used it to buy the Birkin. I need an independent team to determine whether the transaction falls within our existing audit authority. I will not pull the ledger myself unless counsel clears the access." The engagement partner assigned 2 accountants with no connection to my marriage. They confirmed that the lending and investment agreements authorized a targeted review of corporate card expenses, client trust accounts, and employee benefit contributions after a material risk alert. My role was limited to explaining the visible card information and preserving Kylie's public statements. Within the hour, the independent team found a $145,000 charge at a New York luxury boutique coded as client entertainment. The merchant category, purchaser location, and lack of a named client contradicted the description. They expanded the review under the engagement protocol and traced the payment source. The card balance had been cleared through 2 transfers. One came from an account holding employer contributions scheduled for the retirement plan. The other came from a client retainer restricted to a nationwide advertising campaign. Neither transfer matched an approved business purpose. The investigators also found hotel and jewelry charges connected to Kylie and transfers associated with Patricia's debts. I received a formal exception report rather than a private screen full of secrets. It listed the transaction dates, approval credentials, source accounts, and required next steps. The team notified the plan fiduciary, the client escrow custodian, Dominic's fund, and bank compliance counsel. Each party would decide what protection its agreement or legal duty required. The finding was worse than an affair. Bradley had used money belonging to employees and clients to finance a personal fantasy. The Birkin was not merely an expensive gift. It was a receipt showing how easily he converted protected funds into applause from a 24-year-old assistant. Kylie had entered my office to demonstrate that she had won. Instead, she exposed the corporate card the merchant in the first thread of a much larger fraud. I forwarded the independent report to Nathaniel and instructed him to preserve it for the divorce, the investor review, and any lawful referral. The case had changed. I was no longer examining only who would keep the penthouse. I was looking at a CEO who had treated retirement money and client advances as his personal wallet, and every institution around him was beginning to notice, document, and protect itself from the financial damage and legal exposure he had deliberately created for everyone directly involved. 2 days after I uncovered the massive crater in Bradley's corporate accounts, a heavy gold-embossed envelope arrived on my desk. It was an invitation printed on impossibly thick cardstock. Bradley was hosting a lavish gala for the grand opening of his public relations firm's brand new West Loop branch. The audacity of the man was truly something to behold. He had sent this to me as a psychological weapon. It was his way of proving he was at the peak of his career, building a glittering empire while I was supposedly crying into my spreadsheets. He wanted me to witness his triumph. He wanted me to see the life I was missing out on. What Bradley completely failed to realize was that I was already on the VIP guest list. My financial firm had recently been retained by the primary venture capital group backing his new expansion. They wanted a stealth compliance check on their investment, and, as the senior forensic accountant handling the account, I was attending the gala in a strictly professional capacity. Bradley thought he was inviting a broken ex-wife. He had no idea he had just rolled out the red carpet for his lead auditor. I did not wear a gray pantsuit to the gala. I chose a floor-length emerald green silk gown that fit like a second skin, paired with vintage diamond drop earrings. When I stepped out of the black car and handed my keys to the valet outside the glamorous downtown venue, I felt like a predator walking into a very expensive trap. The ballroom was a monument to Bradley's narcissistic excess. There were towering ice sculptures, raw oyster bars, and waiters circulating with trays of vintage champagne. Every single element of the room screamed financial liability. I mentally calculated the cost of the floral arrangements alone and cross-referenced it with the stolen employee retirement funds. He was literally partying on the stolen futures of his staff. I stood near the back of the room, sipping sparkling water and watching the elite of Chicago society mingle. It did not take long for Bradley to spot me. He practically strutted across the marble floor with a smug grin plastered across his face. He held a glass of scotch in one hand and adjusted his custom silk tie with the other. "I am surprised you actually showed up, Jocelyn," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I thought you would be too embarrassed to show your face in my circle after the way you behaved the other night. But I suppose you wanted one last taste of the high life before you fade back into obscurity." I smiled, offering him a polite nod. "I would not miss this for the world, Bradley. The aesthetic you have chosen is very revealing. It tells a fascinating story." He chuckled, taking a sip of his scotch. "It tells the story of success, something you simply could not handle. You always lacked vision. You prefer to play it safe, counting other people's pennies while I am out here making millions. Enjoy the free champagne, Jocelyn. It is the last time you will drink it on my dime." He walked away, oblivious to the fact that he was paying for that champagne with federal wire fraud. A sudden hush fell over the room as the lights dimmed and a spotlight illuminated the main stage. Bradley took his place at the microphone, soaking in the applause from the investors and socialites. He delivered a sickeningly sweet speech about innovation growth and the future of public relations. Then he turned toward the side of the stage, extending his hand. "Every great man needs a muse," Bradley announced, his voice echoing through the ballroom. "Someone who inspires him to break boundaries and think outside the box. I want to introduce the woman who has brought fresh life to this company, my partner and our brand new creative director, Kylie." The crowd offered polite applause as Kylie sashayed onto the stage. She was wearing a sheer designer gown that clung to her fake baby bump, and on her arm was the exact same Himalayan Birkin bag purchased with stolen client retainers. She beamed at the audience, waving like she had just won an Oscar. Giving a 24-year-old assistant with zero management experience the title of creative director was a blatant insult to his actual hardworking staff. It was also a massive red flag for any investor with half a brain. I watched the spectacle with absolute detachment. I was not hurt or jealous. I was simply documenting the liability. That was when I noticed a tall, distinguished man with silver hair standing a few feet away from me. His brow was deeply furrowed as he watched Kylie parade across the stage. This was Dominic. He was the lead venture capitalist who had pumped $5 million of seed money into Bradley's new branch expansion. Dominic was a notoriously ruthless businessman who did not tolerate foolishness or wasted capital. He turned away from the stage and caught my eye. A flash of recognition crossed his face. He knew exactly who I was. In the financial sector, my reputation for tearing down fraudulent companies preceded me. "Jocelyn," he said, stepping closer and lowering his voice so the surrounding guests could not hear. "I did not expect to see the city's sharpest forensic accountant at a public relations launch party. I was under the impression you only attended events when a company was under a microscope." I turned to face him, keeping my expression perfectly composed. "It is a pleasure to see you, Dominic. I find that public launch parties are highly educational. You can learn a lot about a company's fiscal responsibility by observing how they allocate their resources on opening night." Dominic frowned, looking back up at the stage where Bradley was now kissing Kylie's cheek. "He is certainly allocating a lot of resources. I funded this expansion to hire top-tier marketing talent and build regional infrastructure. I did not write a $5 million check to fund a vanity project for a newly promoted 24-year-old creative director. Tell me, Jocelyn, as someone who understands the numbers better than anyone in this room, should I be concerned about my investment?" Dominic was testing whether my professional concern matched his own. I could not disclose confidential account details in a ballroom, and I would not use privileged audit information as gossip in a divorce. Instead, I answered within the authority of his investment agreement. "I cannot discuss unreleased findings here," I said, "but your fund has contractual inspection rights over the seed money escrow and the employee benefit representations Bradley made during due diligence. Submit a written request tonight and have an independent team review those items before any additional capital moves." I handed him a folded note containing no account balances or accusations. It listed 3 neutral instructions: verify the client retainer escrow, reconcile the retirement plan contribution schedule, and suspend the next draw until the review was complete. The note also gave him the engagement partner's number, so the request would enter the official compliance channel rather than pass through me personally. Dominic read it, then looked toward the stage where Bradley was introducing Kylie as creative director, while she displayed the Birkin purchased through the corporate card. "Is this a warning?" he asked. "It is a recommendation that you exercise the rights already written into your investment documents before 9 tomorrow morning." He folded the note and placed it inside his jacket. I did not promise that his investment was worthless or tell him to withdraw money based on a secret tip. The independent review would determine the facts, and Dominic would make his own decision with counsel. "Enjoy the caviar," I added. "Bradley has certainly spent enough on the presentation." I left the gala while the crowd applauded his final toast. Outside, Nathaniel confirmed that the evidence preservation package was ready, and that any request to restrict accounts would require contractual authority or a court order. Bradley believed he had invited a humiliated wife to witness his success. In reality, he had placed his largest investor beside the person qualified to tell him where to look. By the next morning, Dominic's formal audit request would reach the independent team. No confidentiality breach was necessary. Bradley's own ledgers would deliver the warning far more brutally than I ever could. 48 hours after the branch gala, Dominic's independent review confirmed the missing transfers and suspended the next investment draw. At 10 the following morning, my assistant called from reception. Bradley was demanding to see me while holding 24 red roses and insisting our marriage could still be saved. "Send him in," I told her. Before Bradley arrived, I opened the compliance recorder built into my conference system. A red light appeared beside the glass door. Every visitor to our secure floor saw the same notice. Financial and compliance discussions could be recorded and preserved. When Bradley entered, I pointed to the light. "This conversation is being recorded," I said. "If that is a problem, leave now and speak through counsel." He glanced at it, then at the 24 long-stemmed roses in his hands. Desperation overruled caution. "Fine," he muttered. "I have nothing to hide." The roses were not romantic. They were inventory in another campaign, chosen because red photographed well and because Bradley believed expensive gestures erased consequences. A small card was tucked into the bouquet. It read, "Our story is not over." He had written the sentence in the same bold hand he used to approve transfers he never expected anyone to examine. I left the card untouched. He remained standing because I wanted him uncomfortable. Through the glass behind him, my staff kept working. No one stared, but Bradley understood that he was no longer entering the private territory of a compliant wife. He was standing inside a regulated financial office where every claim could become a record. That should have warned him. His ego told him the warning did not apply. He looked as if he had not slept in 2 days. His immaculate hair was disordered, and his custom suit hung badly on his tense frame. He placed the roses on my desk like an offering and gave me a weak smile. "Jocelyn, you look beautiful. You always do." I did not offer him a seat. "To what do I owe this performance, Bradley?" He released a practiced sigh and ran a hand through his hair. "I made a mistake. A catastrophic mistake. The branch expansion put me under pressure, and Kylie became a distraction. She means nothing. I was testing our marriage because I felt you pulling away from my career. You brought divorce papers to our anniversary dinner to test me." "Yes. I wanted to know whether you would fight for us. When you signed without hesitation, I realized how much I could lose. I need you. The company needs you. I need my brilliant wife beside me." The manipulation was transparent. He did not need a wife. He needed a forensic accountant after Dominic ordered an independent review and suspended the next venture capital draw. Bradley was facing insolvency and wanted me to clean the crime scene. "You seemed committed to your new creative director at the gala," I said. "You called her your muse in front of every investor in the room. That was branding. Kylie is a naive girl who got carried away. I can remove her from the company. I want to stop the divorce, go to counseling, and repair this. Tear up the agreement and come home." I let the silence settle. A cheating husband begging for forgiveness was not useful evidence. A chief executive explaining where protected money had gone was different. If we are going to discuss repairing anything, I said there can be no public relations language. I saw the Himalayan Birkin. The purchase was roughly $145,000. Your personal accounts could not support it. How did you pay? His eyes moved to the glass walls, then back to the visible recording light. He could still have left. Instead, he leaned across my desk. I used the corporate card. Kylie threatened to create a scene if I did not buy it as a push present. I thought the next funding installment would cover the gap. The corporate card had a transaction limit. A purchase that large required a manual transfer. Which account supplied the money? His jaw tightened. $80,000 came from the employer contribution account for the retirement plan. The rest came from the advertising retainer for the nationwide campaign. It was temporary. I intended to restore both accounts after Dominic released the next $5 million. Then he froze the draw and demanded an audit. I asked when the first transfer occurred. Bradley hesitated, then admitted he had begun moving smaller amounts 6 months earlier. At first, he coded hotel rooms, jewelry, and travel as client development. When the operating account tightened, he shifted money from the matching contribution reserve, telling himself payroll would replenish it before the quarterly reconciliation. Kylie learned the card never failed and increased her demands. A leased car followed the handbag. Then Patricia called about a gambling debt, and he used another internal transfer to silence the collectors. Each theft created a hole that required a larger theft to hide it. Did the board authorize any of those transactions? I asked. The board does not review every executive expense, he replied. I am the CEO. I have discretion. Not overplan assets or client money held for a defined campaign. His face tightened. Do not lecture me. I built the company. I was going to replace everything. That sentence mattered. It showed knowledge control and intent. He was not describing an accounting accident. He was describing a sequence of conscious decisions made because he believed future funding would erase the evidence. He had admitted taking money from 2 restricted pools. I kept my voice level. You moved retirement plan assets and client campaign funds to buy personal property for your mistress. I borrowed them, he snapped. The money was going back. You know how to restructure ledgers. You could advance enough cash to close the gaps before the auditors arrive. Help me, and I will be the husband you wanted. I will give you anything. Just do not let me lose the company. He was asking me on a recorded compliance system to conceal the diversion. I felt no triumph in the moment, only the cold certainty that he had finally documented himself. You are asking me to risk my license and freedom to hide your transfers, I said. He reached for my hand. Because we a team, because you love me. Please tell me you will fix this. I withdrew my hand. Leave my office. I need to determine how deep the shortfall is. Do not contact me for the rest of the day. I will handle the numbers through the proper channels. Relief softened his face. He heard only what he wanted. Jocelyn would save him again. Thank you, he whispered. I promise you will not regret it. I love you. He left with a lighter stride, convinced his performance had worked. When the door closed, I stopped the recorder and exported the file with its timestamp consent notice and system audit log. I named the package Bradley Interview. I sent it to Nathaniel and to the independent compliance officer supervising Dominic's review. My message was brief. Bradley has admitted diverting retirement plan contributions and client retainer funds, and he asked me to conceal the transfers. Preserve the recording, notify the plan fiduciary and bank fraud unit, and seek an emergency court order preventing further movement from the affected LLC accounts. I did not order a bank to seize money on my personal authority. I did not touch accounts connected to the divorce. Nathaniel would present the evidence to the appropriate court, and the compliance team would issue only the contractual holds allowed under the lending and audit agreements. Nathaniel called within minutes. He did not congratulate me. He asked the questions a careful lawyer should ask. Had Bradley been told about the recording? Was the indicator visible? Had he agreed to continue? Had I promised him immunity or threatened him? I answered each question and sent the visitor policy acknowledgement Bradley had electronically accepted at reception. Only then did Nathaniel say the file could be used without turning my evidence into a new problem. The compliance officer opened a formal incident file. The retirement plan administrator would be notified so the employee's interests could be protected. Dominic's investment entity would receive a preservation notice, not gossip from a rejected wife. The bank would be asked to flag unusual movement while counsel sought judicial relief. Every step would have a date, a custodian, and a reason. That was how real financial traps worked. Not with magic passwords, but with records the other side could not explain away. I carried the roses to the stainless steel trash can and dropped them inside. Bradley believed he had purchased a second chance with flowers and false remorse. Instead, he had given me a voluntary, recorded explanation of the theft. The evidence was preserved. The emergency application was moving. While Bradley waited for a rescue that would never come, Patricia launched her own attack. I was pouring my second cup of coffee the following morning when my phone buzzed with an emergency alert from the luxury high-rise Homeowners Association private social network. My neighbor, a lovely older woman who absolutely despised Patricia, had forwarded me a post. Patricia had gone completely nuclear. She had penned a massive, unhinged essay and broadcast it to the entire building management, the elite neighborhood watch groups, and several influential social circles we mutually occupied. The post was a masterpiece of aristocratic delusion. Patricia claimed I was a barren, greedy sociopath who had tricked her brilliant and trusting son into a predatory marriage. She explicitly stated I was infertile because I was too cold and unnatural to ever carry a child. According to her wild narrative, I was currently attempting to steal her son's public relations firm out of pure spite to compensate for my lack of maternal warmth. She painted Kylie the Mistress as a sweet, innocent victim who was giving Bradley the family I never could. Patricia implored the building management to revoke my access to the penthouse, claiming I was a squatter holding the property hostage. She wanted me to engage. She wanted me to log on and defend myself in the comments section like some desperate reality television housewife. She craved the drama because it would validate her victim narrative. But forensic accountants do not argue in comment sections. We argue in federal court. I preserved Patricia's post with screenshots, the URL timestamps, and the names of groups where she had republished it. Then I sent the package to Nathaniel. Draft a cease and desist letter and a defamation complaint, I said. Use only statements we can prove are false. Do not turn the filing into another gossip campaign. Patricia had called me infertile, accused me of stealing Bradley's company, and asked the HOA to remove me from property I owned. The fertility insult was cruel, but cruelty alone was not the strongest claim. The statements about theft, fraud, and unlawful occupancy were factual accusations distributed to neighbors and business contacts. We had the deed prenup disclosures and financial records to answer them. Nathaniel prepared the complaint and asked where Patricia could be served. I knew she would attend the Oak Brook Country Club luncheon, but I rejected the idea of creating a scene inside the dining room. Serve her lawfully and discreetly, I said. The embarrassment should come from the truth of the papers, not from instructing a process server to perform for an audience. The server waited near the club's reception desk, confirmed Patricia's identity, and handed her the summons and complaint. Several members saw the exchange because Patricia immediately raised her voice and demanded that management throw him out. Her own reaction attracted the room. The public complaint described the defamatory statements and attached the property records necessary to show falsity. The more sensitive financial exhibits were handled differently. During my review of Bradley's transfers, the independent audit team had found payments to entities associated with an offshore gambling operation. Those payments corresponded with messages in which Patricia asked Bradley to cover roughly $100,000 in debts. We did not publish raw account numbers or declare her guilty of a crime in a neighborhood dispute. Nathaniel filed a motion for limited discovery and submitted the detailed transfer schedule under seal, asking the court to protect personal identifiers while allowing us to establish motive and truth. The public pleading stated only that evidence existed showing Bradley had used company funds for obligations connected to Patricia, contradicting her claim that I was inventing financial misconduct to steal his business. That distinction preserved the legal point without using private financial data as a weapon of humiliation. Patricia still humiliated herself. She opened the complaint at the luncheon table, read the paragraph quoting her own HOA post, and realized that every word had been preserved. Then she reached the section identifying the sealed financial exhibit and began shouting that her gambling was nobody's business. Several club members had not known gambling was involved until she announced it herself. She called Bradley from the hallway. According to the voicemail she later left Nathaniel, she demanded that he make the lawsuit disappear before the sealed records reached discovery. Bradley promised to bury me in legal fees and recover the penthouse. The audit trail behind the sealed exhibit was serious. Funds had moved from the agency's operating and retirement-related accounts through a consulting vendor, then toward payments linked to Patricia's debt. The transfers did not, by themselves, prove every allegation, but they established another reason the company accounts required independent review. Nathaniel texted me after service. "She has been served." The club heard more from Patricia than from the process server. Her lawyer has requested a copy of the protective order motion. "Good," I replied. "Let the case move through court." I returned to my spreadsheets. Patricia had tried to destroy my reputation through a community post. I answered with a complaint, narrow enough to defend evidence preserved correctly and financial records protected rather than broadcast. The complaint also preserved an important sequence. Patricia published the accusations only after Bradley lost his contractual claim to the penthouse and after the independent audit formally began and the first protected accounts were carefully reviewed. Her attack had still exposed a new connection. Bradley had not only bought gifts for Kylie with restricted money, he had also paid the debt Patricia hid beneath charity luncheons and pearl necklaces. Mother and son were tied to the same accounts, and the sealed receipts would become far more dangerous than any rumor in the HOA feed. I locked my screen and turned back to my spreadsheets. The game was accelerating, and the walls were closing in on them from every possible direction. By Friday morning, 4 banker boxes filled with Bradley's legal assault covered my conference table. Nathaniel arrived behind the courier, loosened his tie, and studied the stacks with an expression I rarely saw on him. "They are trying to bury you in procedure," he said. "Motions to challenge the prenup, emergency requests for your personal records, Patricia's counterclaim, duplicative discovery, and allegations written to force expensive responses. The merits are weak. The cost is the weapon." The boxes were arranged to create theater. Bright tabs marked urgent appeared on nearly every divider. Several motions repeated the same accusations in different language, forcing the reader to wonder whether volume itself proved truth. One demanded 10 years of my personal tax returns. Another sought the names of every client I had audited since college. A third asked the court to stop me from contacting any investor connected to Bradley, even though my professional engagement with Dominic predated the divorce. The requests were designed to make my career feel like evidence against me. Nathaniel marked each filing with a colored pen. Red meant a deadline we could not miss. Blue meant a request we would narrow through a protective order. Black meant conduct so baseless that he intended to place it before the judge when seeking fees and sanctions. By the time he finished the first box, less than a quarter of the pages represented genuine legal disputes. The rest was intimidation, printed on expensive paper. I opened the first binder. Bradley's attorneys claimed the prenuptial agreement had been signed under emotional pressure. Another filing demanded an injunction against the penthouse transfer. Patricia sought millions for the humiliation at the country club. None of it changed the facts, but every deadline required an answer. My office phone flashed with a saved voicemail. I played it on speaker. "Listen carefully," Jocelyn Bradley said. "I hired the most aggressive litigators in Chicago. They bill $1,000 an hour, and I will keep filing until you are bankrupt. Drop the lawsuit against my mother and return the penthouse. Do that, and I will let you leave quietly. Refuse, and I will destroy your life." The message ended. Nathaniel folded his arms. "We will not ignore these filings. We answer the ones requiring a response move to consolidate the duplicative matters, request a protective order against abusive discovery, and preserve that voicemail for a sanctions motion. But even a winning defense consumes money and attention. A war of attrition works only when the attacker can finance the siege," I said. Dominic had suspended the next investment draw. The employee retirement account and client retainer were already short. Bradley's confession was under review, yet an elite litigation firm would not open 4 boxes of work without a substantial retainer. That money had come from somewhere. I logged into the authorized lending monitoring portal connected to the PR firm's credit agreements. I was not browsing Bradley's private life. Apex Horizon Holdings was both his commercial landlord and a secured lender, and the loan covenants allowed us to review new liens, collateral pledges, and material litigation financing. A new high-risk loan appeared within minutes. Bradley had borrowed enough to fund his lawyers at an interest rate that would have frightened a rational borrower. The lender had accepted a package describing his downtown headquarters as valuable collateral. Nathaniel leaned toward the screen. "He cannot pledge a building he does not own." "He did not pledge the building," I said. "He pledged rights he claims arise from the commercial sublease, including improvements, fixtures, and a supposed option to acquire the master tenancy. The problem is that the option does not exist." I remembered the day Bradley first saw the space. He had stood in the empty reception area with his arms spread wide, already imagining his logo on the wall. The landlord had rejected his application because his startup had no stable revenue, and his personal credit was overextended. He blamed conservative bankers, timid property managers, and everyone except himself. I quietly supplied the security deposit through Apex, negotiated the improvement allowance, and guaranteed the first year of rent. Bradley never asked why the approval arrived 48 hours later. He assumed the world had finally recognized his importance. For 5 years, he sent monthly payments to Apex without reading the name beyond the first word. When cash was tight, I advanced funds to prevent default and recorded each amount as a secured business loan. Those advances were why Apex also held much of the agency's debt. Patricia mocked me for being a desk worker, while I was protecting the address that allowed her son to pretend he had conquered Chicago. I opened the original lease chain. 5 years earlier, when Bradley's credit was too weak to secure 2 premium floors in downtown Chicago, I had formed Apex Horizon Holdings with my own capital. Apex signed the master lease and sublet the space to his agency. Bradley wanted the prestigious address, not the paperwork. He signed where I marked and never asked who controlled Apex. The sublease prohibited assignment collateralization or any claim against the master lease without the landlord's written consent. Bradley had represented to the new lender that consent had been obtained. The attached approval bore a signature purporting to come from Apex's asset manager. It was not mine. Nathaniel examined the metadata. The document had been created 2 days earlier from a template stored on Bradley's office system. So he financed this legal attack with a forged landlord consent, Nathaniel said. And he is already in default under the sublease, not because of a single late payment. The rent ledger showed 3 missed monthly installments, prior written notices, and a cure deadline that had expired, while he used company money on Kylie and Patricia. The unauthorized collateral pledge created a second material breach. Nathaniel's expression sharpened. We can file the commercial eviction action and seek possession. Yes, file it properly, serve the statutory notice and the complaint, attach the payment history, and request an expedited hearing based on the fraudulent collateral document and risk to the premises. No private padlocks, no improvised lockout. I want a court order and a sheriff's enforcement date. Bradley believed litigation was a private weapon he alone could afford. He had overlooked the fact that his law firm, his staff, and his public image all operated from a property controlled by the wife he called a boring employee. Bradley called before Nathaniel could leave. I let the call go to voicemail, then played it through the conference speaker. His confidence had returned because he believed the loan proceeds were on the way. You have until tonight, he said. My attorneys are already preparing another emergency motion. Return the penthouse, withdraw Patricia's case, and stop contacting my investors. If you refuse, I will make sure every client in Chicago hears that you hide assets behind shell companies. The threat gave us another clean exhibit. He had connected the litigation campaign to demands for property and silence. Nathaniel saved the voicemail with the earlier one and prepared a letter directing all future communication through counsel. He still thinks the loan closed, Nathaniel said. Let him think that for a few more hours. The lender would soon verify the forged consent with Apex and discover that the claimed collateral rights did not exist. I did not need to interfere. Bradley had built the fraud into his own application. Nathaniel sorted the banker boxes into 3 piles: necessary responses, duplicative filings for consolidation, conduct supporting sanctions. We would meet every legitimate deadline while refusing to let paper become panic. Then he held up the forged consent. This is the pressure point. It was more than a pressure point. Bradley's headquarters represented his status. Clients entered through a marble lobby bearing his name. Investors photographed themselves beside the waterfall wall. He had built his identity around an address he did not own and had stopped paying to use. My phone buzzed with another message from his litigation firm, demanding that I surrender the penthouse by 5 that evening. I read it once and handed it to Nathaniel. Respond through counsel, I said. Tell them the prenup dispute will be decided in court. Do not trade my home for relief from frivolous claims. And the office serve the termination notice at reception. File the eviction case today. When the judge enters possession, we will give Bradley the final deadline ordered by the court and remove him lawfully. Nathaniel closed his briefcase with a quiet snap. Bradley wanted to bankrupt me with a legal siege. Instead, his own financing documents had exposed a forged consent, an expired cure period, and a tenancy resting on my signature. He thought the penthouse was the only foundation I controlled. He was about to learn that the floors beneath his entire company belonged to Apex Horizon Holdings, and Apex belonged to me. After Nathaniel left to file the eviction case, my phone vibrated with an alert from a burner account I used to monitor public statements relevant to the audit. Kylie had posted a new photograph on Instagram. The image was staged with care. Her manicured hand held a strip of black and white ultrasound pictures above the steering wheel of the Porsche Bradley had promised her. The caption was less subtle. God always blesses the faithful with miracles. Some women chase corporate paychecks because they lack the warmth to build a real family. Karma makes sure the right woman receives the prize. Baby boy coming soon. The comments multiplied beneath the photograph. Patricia wrote that the Abbott name would finally continue through a worthy woman. Several employees from the agency added heart emojis, likely because refusing to celebrate the CEO's mistress felt dangerous. Kylie replied to each message with rehearsed gratitude, describing Craving's nursery colors and the emotional sound of a heartbeat she had supposedly heard at her appointment. Every new detail increased the cost of retreating from the lie. I archived the comments as well. Not because cruelty on social media was a crime, but because timelines matter. A fraud rarely begins with a final transaction. It begins with claims repeated until other people make decisions in reliance on them. Bradley had announced the pregnancy to counsel investors, his mother, and employees. If Kylie later insisted that the post was only a joke, her own responses would contradict her. The post was aimed at me. She wanted strangers to compare her supposed fertility with my career and call her victory moral. I felt no urge to answer. I enlarged the image instead. Forensic work trains the eye to separate narrative from data. A legitimate ultrasound print normally contains consistent identifiers generated by the imaging system, a clinic code, examination date, machine information, and patient data presented in a fixed layout. Kylie's image contained a strange alphanumeric prefix, uneven spacing around the timestamp, and blurred pixels near the lower corner. The defects did not prove a fake pregnancy, but they justified examining the public image more carefully. I did not access medical records. I did not ask a hospital whether Kylie was a patient. That would have crossed a line and destroyed the credibility of everything I was building. Instead, I saved the public post with its URL timestamp and digital hash, then sent the image to Dr. Mitchell Evans, a radiologist who had previously advised my firm on counterfeit billing exhibits. I need a general technical opinion, I wrote. Do not search patient systems or protected records. Please tell me whether this publicly posted image appears to come from standard clinical equipment or a commercial template. While I waited, I reviewed the timing. Kylie had announced the pregnancy just as Bradley accelerated the divorce, surrendered his claim to the penthouse, and began spending company money as if a child guaranteed his future. Her influence depended on one claim: she was carrying the air Bradley believed his success required. Bradley had always treated fatherhood as another public relations achievement. He wanted photographs, congratulations, and a son who would carry his name. Kylie understood that weakness. A pregnancy would force him to choose. Quickly defend her publicly and ignore financial warning signs. If the image was false, she had not merely lied to me. She had used a manufactured baby to control a narcissist who was already stealing to satisfy her. I opened the novelty website in an isolated browser. The listing offered several downloadable packages: a positive pregnancy test, a mock clinic appointment card, and the ultrasound strip Kylie was holding. Customer photographs showed the same fetal profile, the same measurements, and the same cropped corner. The product description even suggested using the image for social media reveals. A purchase did not appear under Kylie's name in any system I could lawfully access, and I did not need it. The identical public source was enough to challenge authenticity and justify formal discovery later. I also compared the Porsche dashboard in her photograph with earlier posts. The vehicle was still on a dealer lot, not in her possession. She had taken the picture during a test drive, framing the steering wheel to suggest ownership. The detail was not central to the pregnancy lie, but it revealed her method: borrow an image, borrow a car, borrow a future, then publish all three as established fact. Mitchell replied 20 minutes later. The image does not match a Chicago hospital format, he wrote. More important, the lower right corner contains part of a commercial watermark. I ran a reverse image search against public sources only. The same ultrasound image appears on a novelty website selling downloadable pregnancy announcements and prank documents. The serial string and fetal measurements are identical to the default sample. He attached side-by-side images. The match was exact. Kylie had cropped the seller's watermark, but left enough pixels for comparison. The supposed patient number was part of the template. No private medical information had been used. The proof came entirely from her own public post and the public product listing. I saved Mitchell's opinion, the archived product page, and the original social media capture in a separate evidence folder. Nathaniel would decide whether the material belonged in the divorce case, a fraud referral, or nowhere at all. I would not release it merely to humiliate her. Still, the strategic meaning was clear. There was no baby in the evidence she had presented. Bradley had sacrificed a 5-year marriage, triggered the prenup, diverted protected money, and promised a new life based on a $20 download. For a moment, I remembered the months when Bradley and I had discussed children. He had blamed my workload whenever the subject became difficult, then avoided every serious conversation about testing or treatment. Now Kylie was weaponizing that private grief for applause. The old Jocelyn might have closed the screen and carried the insult alone. The woman sitting at my desk understood that shame was another tool people used when they feared evidence. I would not let it move my hand. The discovery also changed the risk calculation. If Kylie was willing to invent a pregnancy publicly, she might be willing to sign false reimbursement forms, submit fabricated medical expenses, or claim company benefits. I instructed the independent compliance team to preserve any pregnancy-related expense requests without assuming they were fraudulent. Facts first. Conclusions after authentication. That discipline separated an audit from revenge, even when revenge happened to be waiting at the end. I called Nathaniel through the encrypted line. "The ultrasound post is a commercial template," I said. "We have the public source match and an expert opinion based only on the image. Do not contact Kylie yet." Why wait? Because Bradley is still representing the pregnancy as a financial obligation. His lawyers are claiming he needs access to marital funds for prenatal care, housing, and future child expenses. If they put that assertion into a sworn filing, we will answer with the public evidence and request authentication through proper discovery. I do not want a surprise attack. I want a documented lie. Nathaniel was silent for a moment. "You are letting him repeat it." "I am giving him the opportunity to correct it. If he continues after notice from his own counsel, the consequences belong to him." I sent Nathaniel the archive package with instructions to preserve it and disclose it only through lawful channels. We would not threaten Kylie with exposure. We would not seek her medical history. The proof was already strong because it showed exactly what she had chosen to publish. Across the city, Bradley was facing an eviction complaint, a frozen investment draw, and an audit of restricted accounts. Yet he still believed he was protecting a pregnant mistress and an unborn son. Kylie believed the fake image guaranteed her place beside him. Neither understood that the document had become another receipt. I looked at her caption again. "Karma makes sure the right woman receives the prize." Kylie was correct about one thing. A prize was coming. It simply was not the penthouse, the Porsche, or the title of Mrs. Bradley. It was the moment Bradley learned that the future he had destroyed everything to obtain had never existed. Monday morning began with a security alert on my secondary monitor. Someone inside my own firm was trying to enter a restricted audit directory. The credentials belonged to Kevin, a junior auditor who had once worked as a liaison on Bradley's account and had recently complained about being passed over for promotion. The access attempt was outside his job permissions and came minutes after Bradley received the latest commercial default notice. The incident response room filled within minutes. The cybersecurity director projected a live map of Kevin's movements across the network. He had tried 3 restricted folders before finding the decoy, which showed he was not accidentally opening a shared file. General counsel opened a written case log and required every person in the room to record what they touched. The process felt slow compared with the urgency on the screen, but speed without custody would only create arguments later. I disclosed my conflict immediately. Kevin's target involved my divorce and my separately owned company, so I could not be the sole decision-maker. The managing partner approved the containment steps, and an outside examiner took custody of the forensic image. That separation protected the evidence from Bradley's inevitable claim that I had fabricated the intrusion myself. I did not open his private messages or launch a retaliatory hack. I notified the firm's cybersecurity director and general counsel. Together, we isolated the account, preserved the intrusion logs, and activated a monitored honeypot already approved under our incident response policy. The decoy directory was labeled Private Asset Ledgers. Inside were fictional financial schedules created for security testing, a fake Belize trust, fabricated debt statements for Apex Horizon Holdings, and tax worksheets containing embedded test markers. The metadata and internal cover page identified them as simulations. A legitimate employee opening the folder through normal channels would see the warning. An intruder copying selected pages and stripping the labels could make them look valuable. Kevin entered the decoy folder and downloaded the files. The system recorded the time device file names and external drive identifier. Security stopped him before he left the building, imaged his workstation with counsel present, and suspended him pending investigation. The evidence showed that Kevin had already accepted money from Bradley for information from my private audit files. The honeypot did not create the bribery or the unauthorized access. It documented a theft in progress and prevented him from reaching real client data. Bradley received the copied files before security intercepted Kevin's final message. He opened them in the office he was about to lose and saw exactly what he wanted: apparent proof that I had hidden millions, over-leveraged Apex, and concealed offshore assets from the marriage. A careful person would have asked counsel to authenticate the documents. Bradley wanted immediate cash. He removed the test cover sheets, exported the fictional schedules to clean PDFs, and attached them to an emergency commercial loan application at First National. He represented that the Belize account was a recoverable marital asset and that Apex's leasehold value could support the loan. He also submitted a consent letter purporting to authorize collateralization of the sublease. The letter was not issued by Apex. Kevin had not copied only the balance sheets. He had also taken a draft memo explaining how a fictional borrower might misuse the files. The memo was part of our internal training package and contained examples of false collateral claims. Bradley stripped the training header but followed the examples almost line by line when preparing his application. That detail would later make his explanation even weaker. He could not plausibly claim he believed the package was an ordinary set of marital records while ignoring the labels and using the document's own warnings as instructions. The bank recorded his in-person meeting. Bradley told the loan officer that he had recently discovered the assets through a confidential marital source and had authority to pledge them because the divorce would soon award him half. When the officer asked for a court order or authenticated account statement, he insisted that his sworn affidavit was sufficient and pressured the bank to move before the eviction deadline. The urgency came from his own financial collapse, not from any request by me. The bank's verification team contacted the entities listed in the package. Apex denied the consent. The routing number for the supposed Belize account did not correspond to a real financial institution. Embedded identifiers matched the security test memorandum created before Kevin's intrusion. First National stopped underwriting before any money was released. Its fraud department preserved Bradley's signed certifications, device records, and supporting documents, then made the required referrals. No one at my direction approved a loan to deepen his crime. No funds changed hands. Bradley had attempted to obtain credit by presenting stolen, altered fiction as genuine collateral. Nathaniel called as the bank completed its first review. He used the honeypot, he said. He signed the authenticity certificate and the beneficial interest affidavit. Did the bank fund anything? Not a dollar. Verification caught it. They are preserving the full package and communicating through counsel. Good. We do not need a loss to understand what he tried to do, but we also do not manufacture one. The distinction mattered. Revenge could never require me to become the architect of Bradley's criminal choice. My system had protected real records. Kevin chose to steal. Bradley chose to alter the files, claim them as genuine, and ask a federally insured bank for money. Nathaniel warned me that the family court use of the same files required a different analysis. The bank referral concerned false representations to obtain credit. The divorce court would care about the theft, the false affidavit, and Bradley's credibility, but it would not decide federal guilt. We kept the evidence packages separate, so each tribunal received only what belonged there. That discipline also protected the real assets. Apex's legitimate records stayed sealed. Client audit data remained untouched. The honeypot had absorbed the intrusion exactly as designed, and the only financial statements Bradley obtained were inventions he chose to weaponize. The firm's general counsel arranged for Kevin's interview with independent representation. He admitted Bradley had promised him a senior position and $50,000 after the divorce. He also surrendered the payment record and messages directing him to search for material that could destroy my prenup case. I instructed the team to preserve everything and stop discussing the matter outside counsel. Kevin's misconduct would be handled through employment procedures and whatever law enforcement decided. I would not threaten him into becoming a witness. By late afternoon, the bank fraud referral intrusion logs and forged landlord consent were moving through separate channels toward the same conclusion. Bradley believed he had stolen my weakness. In reality, he had converted a monitored security decoy into a signed statement of his own intent. He was no longer merely a husband using frivolous litigation and company money to pressure his wife. He had placed altered documents before a bank, sworn they were real, and tied the attempt to the office lease he had no right to pledge. The next move belonged to Patricia. While federal lawyers reviewed Bradley's application, she turned a hospital room into a stage and invited the press to watch. While Bradley was turning stolen documents into a bank fraud investigation, Patricia staged her final public performance. The next morning, a Chicago society blog published a headline naming me prominent socialite hospitalized after campaign by vengeful daughter-in-law. According to the article, Patricia had collapsed with chest pain and was recovering in the VIP wing of a private hospital. Bradley stood outside the entrance for cameras, describing his mother as an elderly victim being bullied by a barren woman determined to steal his company. The article included carefully cropped photographs of Bradley, holding his mother's hand, and Patricia staring weakly toward the window. It quoted unnamed friends who said I had pursued her with financial violence and destroyed a once close family. No one mentioned the post in which she called me infertile, greedy, and unstable. No one mentioned the gambling transfers attached to the lawsuit. Bradley had removed every fact that made the hospital scene inconvenient. My first impulse was not anger. It was to build a source list. I marked each claim as documented, unsupported, or contradicted by a public record. Nathaniel reviewed the chart and warned me not to respond to speculation about her health. A real patient can also exploit publicity. A manipulative campaign does not prove a fabricated illness. We would challenge the narrative without pretending to be doctors. The timing was not accidental. Patricia's response deadline in the defamation case was approaching, and Nathaniel had noticed her lawyer preparing to request a medical delay. Bradley also needed the public to forget the missing retirement money, the frozen investment draw, and the eviction action. A hospital bed offered white sheets, soft lighting, and sympathy. I did not call the hospital for confidential information. I had no right to her diagnosis, treatment, or bill. I did not need any of it. Patricia's own public fundraising page created by Bradley's PR team displayed a requested amount for the VIP stay and invited supporters to contribute toward her unexpected medical burden. The page also showed the suite category and linked directly to the hospital foundation's payment portal. I saved the fundraiser with its timestamp and sent it to Nathaniel. Then, I contacted the charitable foundation I had established for women facing financial abuse. The foundation's board approved a restricted public donation through the hospital's published portal, equal to the amount Patricia herself had requested. The payment did not purchase medical records or access, it simply removed the expense she was using as part of the performance. The foundation administrator called before approving the transfer. She wanted confirmation that the gift would not be conditioned on Patricia dropping claims or speaking favorably about me. I confirmed it was unconditional. The hospital foundation could apply it only to the public appeal Patricia's team had created. If the final eligible balance proved lower, the unused amount would remain with the foundation for other patients. That safeguard mattered. I was not buying leverage. I was removing the prop from a public campaign. Nathaniel also reviewed the card for tone. My first draft had been sharper. He crossed out a sentence accusing Patricia of faking a heart attack and replaced it with language tied to the docket. The correction made the message stronger because every line could be defended with a document. Bradley specialized in emotion without proof. I would answer with proof without unnecessary emotion. For the visual portion, I called a Gold Coast florist and ordered an enormous arrangement of white lilies, orchids, and roses. It looked more suited to a state funeral than a recovery room. The card was drafted with Nathaniel's approval and contained only facts already public in filed court records. Wishing you a swift recovery. The publicly requested hospital amount has been paid through a foundation supporting victims of financial abuse. Rest well so you can attend the scheduled defamation hearing and respond to the lawful financial subpoenas next month. Warmest regards, Jocelyn. Attached was a receipt from the hospital foundation showing the donation, not an itemized medical statement. Behind it was a copy of the public docket page listing the hearing date. Nothing disclosed a diagnosis. Nothing came from a protected hospital file. Bradley had invited the same society reporter into Patricia's room for a bedside interview. He wanted a photograph of his mother looking pale beneath expensive blankets, while he described himself as a devoted son. The floral arrangement arrived in the middle of the interview and was too large to ignore. The reporter read the card aloud after Patricia gestured toward it, expecting another message of support. The room changed. Bradley tried to take the card, but the reporter had already seen the court date and the name of the Financial Abuse Foundation. She asked why a woman supposedly too ill to face legal proceedings was participating in a scheduled media interview. She asked whether the online fundraiser remained active after the requested amount had been paid. Then she asked Bradley about the gambling-related transfers described in the public complaint. Patricia's expression shifted from fragile sorrow to fury. She demanded that the camera be turned off. Bradley stepped between the reporter and the bed, proving in one movement that the interview had never been about privacy or recovery. It had been a controlled publicity event, and control was gone. Within 2 hours, the blog replaced its first story with a correction. The new article did not claim Patricia's symptoms were fake. The reporter had no medical basis for that conclusion. Instead, it reported what could be verified. Patricia had used a hospital interview to blame me, while an active defamation case and financial subpoenas were pending. The publicly requested bill had been paid, and Bradley refused to answer questions about transfers connected to her gambling debt. That distinction mattered. I was not diagnosing Patricia or accusing her of inventing chest pain. I was exposing the public relations strategy built around the hospitalization. The facts were enough. The HOA comments reversed within hours. Neighbors who had praised Patricia's courage now asked why she had called cameras before calling her lawyer. Country club acquaintances quietly deleted supportive posts. Bradley's clients forwarded the article to Dominic's audit team. The pity campaign had become another trail leading back to the company accounts. Dominic forwarded me a message from one of his analysts. Several clients had already paused new campaigns after seeing the revised article. They were not reacting to gossip about a mother-in-law. They were reacting to the possibility that Bradley's firm had used client advances for personal debts and then attempted to silence questions through a media spectacle. Reputation had always been Bradley's most valuable asset. He had set fire to it himself while standing in a hospital lobby. Patricia discharged herself the following morning. Her attorneys provided a brief note requesting reasonable scheduling flexibility, but did not claim she was incapable of participating. The case remained on track. Her social circle, however, was no longer interested in protecting her. The same women who once repeated her attacks now asked whether their charity donations had ever reached the causes she promoted. One public lie had caused people to inspect a decade of private assumptions. Nathaniel called that afternoon. Her lawyer withdrew the request for an indefinite medical delay, he said. They agreed to a short scheduling accommodation and remote testimony if a physician later certifies a genuine need. Good, I replied. I wanted the case heard lawfully, not won through cruelty. The public relations war had turned because Patricia and Bradley insisted on making private conflict public. I had answered with records they had placed in the public domain themselves. No stolen chart, no secret diagnosis, just a fundraiser, a docket, a donation receipt, and questions they could not spin. Bradley still believed the fraudulent loan application might restore his cash. Kylie still expected a birthday celebration and a Porsche. Patricia still believed status could shield her from subpoenas. Their image was broken, but the financial machinery beneath it had not finished moving. The next alert would not come from a society blog. It would come from the bank. Thursday was Kylie's 25th birthday, and Bradley still intended to buy spectacle with money he no longer controlled. He sat in a Gold Coast event planning office, reviewing a $75,000 proposal for a rooftop party, open bar ice sculpture, and private DJ. He handed over the black corporate card without reading the contract. The planner returned after several minutes and placed the card on the table. The transaction had been declined. Bradley demanded that she run it again, then produced a platinum card tied to the operating account. That card failed too. My compliance dashboard recorded both attempts. The holds were not personal commands from an angry wife. After Bradley's recorded admission, the plan administrator restricted movement from the retirement contribution account Dominic's fund suspended further draws, and the bank placed fraud review holds on the corporate cards. Nathaniel had also obtained a temporary court order preserving specified investor and client funds while the receiver application was considered. The order did not seize every asset associated with Bradley's Social Security number. It identified particular accounts and prohibited extraordinary transfers outside ordinary payroll taxes and approved business expenses. Personal accounts remained subject to their own contracts and any later court orders. The automated alerts showed how often Bradley tested the boundaries. After the event planner declined the first charge, he tried splitting the amount into 4 smaller deposits. When those failed, he attempted to label one charge as client hospitality and another as regional media research. The monitoring rules rejected each request because the venue date and beneficiary matched a personal celebration. He was not responding to a computer error. He was searching for a path around a known restriction. The monitor approved only 3 payments that morning: employee payroll, the health insurance premium, and a critical software subscription needed to preserve client files. That contrast would later matter. It showed the hold was targeted and operational, not a vindictive shutdown designed to destroy the company. Bradley could still protect employees and records. He simply could not turn other people's money into champagne. The event planner also preserved the declined authorization codes and Bradley's signed contract. Those records showed he tried to commit the company to the party after receiving notice that spending was restricted, further separating an innocent mistake from deliberate evasion. Bradley called his private banker from the parking lot. "Turn the cards back on," he shouted. "I have vendors waiting. Do you understand how much money my company moves through your institution?" The senior vice president transferred the call to the bank's legal and risk division. The response was calm. The affected corporate facilities remain restricted pending review, the banker said. The proposed secondary loan has been terminated. Your collateral package included a landlord consent. Apex Horizon Holdings has denied signing in financial schedules. The bank's investigators have identified as fabricated. Those documents came from my wife, Bradley said. They are marital assets. Their source does not authorize you to certify false information to this bank. No loan proceeds were released. Existing lenders have issued notices of default under the credit agreements, and certain pledged business assets are subject to collection and court-supervised preservation. You must communicate through counsel. Bradley's voice dropped. I need access to the operating account. Kylie is waiting for me to confirm the venue. The request is not an ordinary business expense, the banker replied. Payroll and necessary approved expenses may be submitted to the court-appointed monitor. A birthday party will not be authorized from restricted corporate funds. The call ended. Bradley sat in his leased car staring at the dead screen. The important change was not that a bank had magically confiscated his life. It was that every institution he had treated as scenery was now following its own duty. The plan fiduciary protected employees. The bank protected itself from fraud. Investors preserved their capital. The court kept disputed money from disappearing. I thought about the employees whose matching contributions had vanished while Bradley planned Kylie's party. Most had never attended one of his galas. They worked late, creating campaigns, answered clients on weekends, and trusted the payroll system to do what the company promised. A single Birkin cost more than several of them earned in a year. The $75,000 birthday contract represented months of missing retirement deposits. The numbers were no longer abstract. They were time taken from people who had earned it. Dominic's compliance team also contacted the agency's largest clients. They were told only that campaign retainers were under review and that an independent monitor would approve essential expenditures. No one accused Bradley publicly before charges. The purpose was to stop additional loss and preserve projects where possible. Several clients agreed to pause rather than terminate immediately, giving the employees a chance to complete work under supervision. From my office, I watched the account activity flatten. No $75,000 party. No new Porsche deposit. No last-minute transfer to a shell vendor. Ordinary payroll requests moved to the monitor for review, giving employees a chance to be paid while Bradley's personal spending stopped. Nathaniel called with an update. First National had preserved the loan application device logs and verification correspondence. The U.S. Attorney's Office had opened a review after the bank's referral. The application had never funded, but attempting to obtain credit through false statements could still support a bank fraud charge. The event planning decline reached social media before lunch. Kylie had already told friends to expect the party of the year. When the venue disappeared from her invitations, she called Bradley repeatedly. He ignored her because he had no explanation that preserved the image of a wealthy CEO. Then she tried the Porsche dealership. The agency card and the supplemental card were both declined. The dealer asked for another payment method and informed her that the corporate guarantee was under review. That humiliation did what the federal investigation had not yet done. It drove Kylie directly toward me. My assistant called from reception. She did not need to say the name. I could hear the heels, the raised voice, and the demand to open Bradley's accounts from behind the glass door. I placed the ultrasound evidence disputed purchase ledger and contact information for independent counsel into a folder. The next conversation would not be a private threat or a bargain for silence. It would be recorded, lawful, and very clear about what I could not promise. Before the reception doors opened, I asked the compliance officer to remain available by video. Kylie might arrive with useful information, but she was also a frightened beneficiary of disputed funds. I wanted a witness to the process and a record that no promise, threat, or private settlement would ever be made privately there. The bank had closed the financial valve. Now the woman who believed Bradley's money proved his power was about to discover that the cards were only plastic and every dollar behind them belonged to someone he had betrayed. The bank's hold reached Kylie before Bradley understood what had happened. She stormed through my reception area in a crimson dress and designer trench coat, her fake baby bump pushing forward like a weapon. "Turn the cards back on!" she screamed, slamming both hands on my desk. "The Porsche dealer ran my deposit 3 times. Everyone in the showroom looked at me like I was a fraud. Bradley will not answer. I know you did this." I set down my espresso and indicated the chair across from me. "Sit down, Kylie. This office records compliance conversations. You may leave, call a lawyer, or continue with that understanding." She saw the red indicator beside the door and sat. Rage gave way to caution, but not enough to stop her. "You are jealous because Bradley chose a real family," she said. "He is a CEO. His company is worth millions. You cannot freeze his life because he stopped loving you." I placed a manila folder on the desk. The accounts were restricted because his bank plan administrator lenders and a federal court were responding to evidence of diverted retirement contributions, missing client funds, and false collateral documents. I had submitted evidence. I had not personally seized every dollar he owned. She had also brought a glossy purchase folder from the dealership. The front page showed Kylie's name beside a photograph of a white Porsche Macan. The deposit form listed Bradley's agency as guarantor and described the vehicle as an executive brand development asset. Kylie had signed beneath that description, even though she had never held an executive role, and the car was intended for personal use. I added the document to the list of items her lawyer would need to address. "You walked into a federally regulated financial office and demanded access to money already subject to preservation orders," I said. "That does not make you guilty of every act Bradley committed, but it shows how completely he trained you to treat corporate funds as private cash. The safest thing you can do now is stop performing and start preserving facts." Then I opened the folder. The first page was Kylie's Instagram post. The second was the archived product listing showing the same ultrasound image for sale as a novelty download. The third contained Dr. Mitchell's public source comparison and the visible remnants of the cropped watermark. "There is no authenticated evidence of a pregnancy," I said. "The image you published is a commercial template." Color left her face. Her hands moved away from her stomach. "That proves nothing," she whispered. "People use sample images for announcements. Then your attorney can provide legitimate records through lawful discovery if the pregnancy becomes relevant. I am not asking for them now. I am showing you why the store you used to obtain money and property will be examined." I placed the purchase ledger beside the images: the Birkin Hotel stage jewelry, the Porsche deposit, and expense reimbursements submitted as client development. Each item had been paid from accounts Bradley had no right to use for personal gifts. "I did not know where the money came from," Kylie said. "He told me the company was his." "That may matter. So will what you asked for, what he told you, what forms you signed, and whether you helped label personal purchases as business expenses. I am not a prosecutor, and I cannot promise immunity. You need independent counsel." Her anger collapsed. "What do you want from me?" "The truth preserved properly. Nathaniel can give your lawyer the contact information for the investigators and the independent compliance team. You may cooperate, voluntarily return property purchased with disputed funds, and provide records. The government will decide whether your conduct creates liability. I will not threaten to publish medical claims, and I will not hide evidence for you." She stared at the folder, calculating. Her loyalty to Bradley had always depended on access. The cards were dead. The office was facing eviction. The penthouse belonged to me under the prenup claim. The man she called powerful could no longer finance a birthday dinner. "He told me the retirement transfer was temporary," she said at last. "He said Dominic's next investment would replace it before anyone noticed. He made me sign expense forms saying the bag and travel were part of a brand campaign. I never met the supposed client. Kylie admitted that Bradley had promised to make her a formal equity partner after the divorce. He drafted a side letter granting her a percentage of future profits, but he never gave her a signed copy. She believed the fake pregnancy would force him to complete it. When I asked whether she had seen the company accounts, she described evenings in hotel rooms where Bradley opened banking apps and bragged that no auditor could follow his transfers. She remembered account nicknames like approximate dates and the names of 2 vendors that did no real work. Those details were useful, but I stopped her from continuing without counsel. A frightened witness can contaminate a case by guessing, exaggerating, or blending memory with what she has since learned. I told her to write nothing from memory until her lawyer and the forensic examiner created a structured chronology. Precision mattered more than drama. "Did you keep messages?" Her eyes lifted. All of them. He was careless when he was angry. He sent screenshots of balances and told me when to use the corporate card. He also told me Patricia's gambling debt had to be paid before men came to her house. "Do not send anything to me directly," I said. "Preserve the phone. Do not delete, edit, or organize the messages. Your lawyer can arrange a forensic copy so metadata remains intact." Kylie looked toward the Birkin on her arm. For the first time, it no longer looked like proof she had won. It looked like tagged property. "If I cooperate, can I keep out of prison?" "No one in this room can answer that. Cooperation can be considered, but prosecutors and courts make those decisions. Anyone promising you a guaranteed clean record is lying." She breathed through the panic, then nodded. "I will call a lawyer. I will give them everything." There was one more fact she had not yet said aloud. Did Bradley know the ultrasound image was purchased? No? Her answer came quickly. "He never asked to attend an appointment. He wanted a son, and I gave him a picture. He announced the pregnancy before I even finished the lie." The sentence stripped away the last illusion. Bradley had detonated his marriage for a fantasy he had never verified. Kylie had manipulated him, but his arrogance had done most of the work. Nathaniel joined us by secure video. He repeated that Kylie needed separate counsel and that neither he nor I represented her. He gave her the names of the investigating agencies already involved and instructions for surrendering disputed property through an escrow custodian. Kylie removed the Birkin slowly and set it on my desk. "This was bought with a corporate card," she said. "I do not want it in my apartment when agents arrive." I did not take personal possession. My assistant called the recovery trustee, who photographed the bag, issued a receipt, and placed it in a sealed evidence locker pending ownership review. Kylie stood to leave. The fake confidence had vanished. She looked 24 again, not a socialite, not a future wife, just a frightened woman who had attached herself to a fraud because the gifts were beautiful. "I will tell them everything," she said. "Tell them accurately," I replied. "Do not make Bradley worse to make yourself look better. The records will decide what happened." She left without the handbag, the Porsche, or the pregnancy performance. Within an hour, her attorney contacted Nathaniel to arrange a voluntary interview and a forensic download of her phone. Bradley had expected Kylie to stand beside him when the money stopped. Instead, the moment she understood the ship was sinking, she became the witness who could describe every hole he had cut into the hull. With Kylie represented and the Birkin in a recovery trustee's custody, I turned to the commercial eviction. The process had begun weeks earlier, with written default notices, an expired cure period, and a filed complaint. That morning, the Cook County judge entered an agreed possession schedule after Bradley's new attorney conceded the rent arrears and the forged collateral consent. The agency had 48 hours to remove personal property before the sheriff supervised the turnover. The order also resolved a practical problem the original script had ignored. A landlord cannot simply arrive with private guards and declare a commercial tenant erased. The court file contained the notice of non-payment proof of service, the lease violation notice Bradley's failed cure, and the lender's verification that the collateral consent was false. Bradley had been given opportunities to respond. He chose threats instead. The 48-hour period was not the beginning of the eviction. It was the final move-out window after due process had already run. Nathaniel had insisted on that sequence, even when I wanted speed. A victory that could be reversed on procedural grounds was not a victory. Bradley had survived for years by claiming other people broke rules while he ignored them. I would not give him the same argument against me. At 2 p.m, I met Nathaniel in the lobby of my building. He carried the possession order, the lease file, and an inventory protocol. 2 licensed security contractors accompanied us, not to throw anyone into the street, but to preserve equipment and prevent records from disappearing during the move. The property manager posted written instructions at reception in English and Spanish, scheduled supervised pickup periods, and prohibited disposal of files. That practical detail kept the move from becoming a spectacle and protected employees who had done nothing wrong. We rode 6 blocks to Bradley's headquarters. The reception floor was still designed as a monument to him, white marble a waterfall wall, and his agency logo in metal letters. Employees looked up as we stepped from the elevator. No one spoke. I walked to the corner office and opened the glass door without waiting for an invitation. Bradley was pacing behind his desk with a phone pressed to his ear. His shirt was wrinkled, and an unlit cigar shook between his fingers. He ended the call when he saw us. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. "This is my company. Get out before I call building security." Nathaniel placed the court order on the desk. The building's property manager entered behind us, with a sheriff's civil process deputy who had come to confirm service and explain the turnover schedule. "You have already been served," Nathaniel said. The court entered possession in favor of Apex Horizon Holdings after 3 months of unpaid rent, the expired cure notice, and the unauthorized attempt to pledge rights you did not own. The order gives the company 48 hours to remove personal property and preserve business records. After that, access transfers to the landlord under sheriff supervision. Bradley glanced at the first page and laughed too loudly. "Apex is a real estate conglomerate. You do not represent them." I turned the document to the signature page. "I am the managing member of Apex Horizon Holdings," I said. "I created it 5 years ago when your credit could not secure this space. Apex holds the master lease. Your agency is the subtenant. You have been paying rent to my company since the day you moved in." He read my name twice. The color left his face. "That is impossible. You were helping me. I was helping you. I supplied the security deposit, negotiated the build-out, and advanced rent when cash was short. You called the paperwork boring, so you never learned who protected the address that made you look successful." He looked through the glass walls. Employees had begun gathering near the bullpen, pretending to pack while listening. "You cannot take my company because of rent," he said. "I am not taking the company. The court is returning possession of the premises to its lawful tenant. Your corporate assets remain subject to the receiver secured creditor's employee benefit claims and whatever ownership the court later determines. You may remove personal items and approved business equipment, but nothing covered by a preservation notice can be destroyed, hidden, or transferred." Nathaniel handed him the inventory rules. Independent technicians would image the servers before relocation. Payroll and employee records would be protected. Staff could retrieve personal belongings. The order was designed to preserve value, not create a theatrical lockout. Bradley's eyes moved to the waterfall wall, the conference rooms, and the glass office where he had announced himself as an elite CEO. For the first time, he understood that the foundation had never been his. "Give me 1 week," he whispered. "I can find new funding. I can pay the rent and repair everything. The primary bank has restricted the corporate accounts under court and compliance orders," Nathaniel said. "The lender has withdrawn the proposed loan after verifying the forged consent. The venture investors are pursuing recovery. There is no confirmed funding source." Bradley looked at me. "Jocelyn, please. My entire life is here." "Your employees' retirement money was here too," I replied. "So were client retainers and investor funds. You spent them on a mistress, your mother's gambling debt, and a legal campaign against me." The 48-hour schedule is more mercy than you gave anyone else. The deputy explained that violating the preservation terms could lead to contempt and separate criminal consequences. Bradley stopped arguing. He sank into his chair while staff began an orderly exit under the property manager's supervision. The employee's reaction became another quiet indictment. The finance manager produced emails showing that she had warned Bradley about unpaid rent 3 times. Human Resources brought a reconciliation report documenting missing employer contributions. 2 account executives asked whether client campaign deposits had been used for the West Loop Gala. No one defended the man in the corner office. They were not disloyal. They were people discovering that their jobs, pensions, and reputations had been collateral in his private performance. I authorized the receiver's payroll specialist to establish a hotline and secure copies of personnel records. Employees would receive written instructions rather than rumors. The agency might fail, but Bradley would not be allowed to use confusion as one final way to control them. I left him with Nathaniel and walked through the bullpen. Several employees approached quietly. One asked whether their final paychecks would clear. Another wanted to know whether the retirement contributions could be restored. I could not promise outcomes, but I told them a planned fiduciary receiver and federal investigators were tracing the money. Their claims would not be ignored simply because Bradley's company had collapsed. Behind me, Bradley grabbed his desk phone and called Patricia. He still believed his mother had hidden wealth capable of saving him. She answered after several rings, but the voice on the line was not the polished socialite he expected. Patricia was crying. In the background, agents identified themselves and read items from a search warrant. "Mom, I need money," Bradley said. "The bank froze everything. Jocelyn owns the lease. I need a defense lawyer and a new office." "I cannot help you," Patricia shouted. "They're searching the house." The investigation had not appeared from a lawsuit alone. The gambling-related transfers, tax filings, financial institution reports, and corroborating records had been presented to a federal magistrate. The resulting warrant authorized agents to search for evidence of tax evasion, illegal gambling payments, and movement of company money through accounts Patricia controlled. "They know about the offshore payments," she cried. "They took the computers. They froze the account the collectors used. They are inventorying the cars and jewelry because they believe the purchases came from unreported income." Bradley's shoulders folded. If agents could trace Patricia's accounts, they could trace the money back to his agency. "Tell them it was a loan," he whispered. A man's voice ordered Patricia to end the call and hand over the phone because it fell within the warrant's evidence protocol. The line went dead. Bradley remained in the glass office, surrounded by packed boxes and silent employees. He had called his mother, expecting a rescue. Instead, he heard the other half of his financial network being dismantled under a judicial warrant. By sunset, the first trucks carried approved office furniture away. Servers remained sealed for imaging. The agency logo still gleamed above the waterfall, but no one stopped to admire it. Bradley had lost the penthouse, claimed the investment draw, the Mistress, the bank access, and now the space that gave his company a physical identity. Patricia had no secret fortune left to offer. The legal papers he used to threaten me were stacked beside a possession order bearing my company's name. Before leaving, I photographed the empty reception desk and the sealed server room for the possession record. The images were not trophies. They were proof that the handover occurred without smashed locks, missing files, or injured staff. Even Bradley's collapse would be documented correctly, fully and completely. He was not yet in prison. He was not yet convicted. But every exit he had built from other people's money was closing one documented step at a time. 4 weeks later, the Cook County courtroom was quiet enough to hear the clerk arranging exhibits. The commercial office had been turned over, the receiver controlled the remaining agency records, and Bradley's financial network was under investigation. Yet he entered family court carrying the honeypot documents as if they were a winning hand. He looked thinner, but the arrogance remained. His attorney, Donald, placed a thick folder on the podium and asked Judge Harrison to invalidate the prenuptial agreement. He claimed I had hidden millions through Apex Horizon Holdings and an offshore trust, making the marriage agreement unenforceable because Bradley had not received full financial disclosure. The allegations were serious enough to require an answer. That was why Nathaniel and I had prepared the chain of evidence, rather than relying on a dramatic surprise. Donald handed the judge printed copies of the fake Belize account, fabricated tax schedules, and false debt ledger Kevin had taken from my server. He described them as recently discovered marital assets. Bradley signed an affidavit stating that the documents were authentic copies of records I had concealed. Across the aisle, he smiled at me. He believed theft had given him truth. Judge Harrison studied the pages. "If these records are genuine," she said, "they may affect both disclosure and enforceability." Counsel for Jocelyn Nathaniel rose. "The documents exist, Your Honor, but the financial information in them does not. They are monitored cybersecurity decoys created after an unauthorized attempt to enter my client's audit system." Donald objected, calling the explanation entrapment. Nathaniel did not argue with the label. He built the timeline. First came the intrusion alert, showing Kevin's credentials entering a restricted directory outside the scope of his job. Next came the internal security ticket, created before the decoy folder was opened. Then came the honeypot design memorandum, timestamped and preserved by the firm's cybersecurity director, describing each fictional account and the embedded markers. Finally came the forensic image of Kevin's workstation and the communication in which Bradley offered money for documents from my private audit files. The decoy had not invited Bradley to commit a crime. It had recorded an intrusion already in progress. Every file contained internal metadata identifying it as test data. Someone later stripped the visible labels and converted the material into what appeared to be genuine collateral. Donald looked at Bradley. Bradley stared at the table. Nathaniel then produced the bank package. After receiving the stolen files, Bradley submitted them to First National Commercial Bank in support of an emergency loan. He signed certifications that the offshore assets existed, that he possessed a lawful interest in them, and that the attached landlord consent was genuine. The bank never funded the loan. Its fraud team stopped the application during verification and preserved the records for investigators. "This family court is not trying a bank fraud case," Nathaniel said. "We offer the bank file for a narrower purpose: credibility, dissipation of assets, litigation misconduct, and the source of the documents Bradley asks this court to trust." Judge Harrison agreed. She did not pronounce Bradley guilty of a federal offense. She admitted the records for the pending divorce issues and noted that criminal questions belonged to another court. Donald requested a recess. In the hallway, he demanded an explanation from Bradley. Their voices carried through the closed door. Bradley insisted the files came from a whistleblower and that the bank had misunderstood. Donald asked whether he had removed labels, signed the certifications, and used the same documents in a sworn family court affidavit. Bradley's silence answered him. When court resumed, Donald withdrew the accusation that the Belize account was real and asked permission to correct the filing. He did not abandon Bradley, but he refused to repeat a factual claim he could no longer support. Nathaniel turned to the prenuptial agreement. The original disclosure schedule showed my ownership of Apex Horizon Holdings, my professional income, and the property interests each spouse brought into the marriage. Bradley had been represented by separate counsel. He had signed after a review period and acknowledged the provisions governing separate property and infidelity-related disposition of the penthouse. The restaurant's signature had not magically transferred real estate at midnight. It had triggered the contractual waiver and authorized us to seek enforcement. The deed remained in my name, and the court now had to determine whether the prenup was voluntary, properly disclosed, and enforceable under Illinois law. The courtroom record also corrected another exaggeration in Bradley's earlier threats. His lawyers had claimed the prenup could be destroyed simply because our marriage ended badly. Nathaniel introduced correspondence from the weeks before the wedding, showing that Bradley negotiated specific changes, rejected one proposed support waiver, and obtained a higher limit on business spending. He had not signed a document placed in front of him without review. He had treated the agreement like every other deal, bargaining aggressively until he believed the terms favored him. My disclosure schedule listed Apex by name, its formation date, and my membership interest. It did not list the future value of a building lease that had not yet been signed, because that value did not exist at the time. Bradley's counsel had received the schedule and acknowledged it. The hidden empire he described was not hidden. It was simply ignored by a man who considered my work too boring to read. Bradley's attorney argued that the infidelity clause was punitive and that he had signed the divorce draft under emotional pressure. Nathaniel answered with Bradley's own email, instructing his lawyer to prepare the papers, his restaurant statements offering an open marriage or nothing, and his later voicemail demanding the penthouse in exchange for ending abusive litigation. Judge Harrison found that Bradley had initiated the dissolution, had independent representation, and had not proved coercion or concealment. She enforced the property provisions applicable to the penthouse and confirmed that my separately owned interests, including Apex, remained mine. She also entered temporary orders preserving disputed corporate proceeds for the receiver and employee benefit claims, rather than awarding every business asset to either spouse without accounting. The divorce was granted. Bradley did not receive the penthouse, my separate accounts, or ownership of Apex. His claims to the remaining agency value would be addressed only after debts, employee losses, investor claims, and the receiver's accounting. Judge Harrison then addressed the conduct in her courtroom. She referred the false affidavit and stolen records to the appropriate authorities, ordered Bradley to preserve all devices, and warned him that destroying evidence would violate existing orders. She did not sentence him. She did not convert a divorce hearing into a federal criminal trial. When the clerk called the next case, the heavy doors opened. 2 FBI agents waited in the corridor with an assistant United States attorney and a bank investigator. They did not rush the bench with handcuffs. The federal complaint had not yet been unsealed, and the arrest warrant was scheduled for execution after prosecutors completed the final affidavit. The agents served Bradley with a grand jury subpoena, a preservation demand, and a notice directing counsel to arrange his surrender on Monday morning. They also advised him that his passport was the subject of an emergency restriction request, and that any attempt to move investor funds or leave the jurisdiction would be reported immediately. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited behind the security line. Nathaniel instructed me not to comment on the federal investigation, and I followed that advice. Bradley, however, stopped long enough to tell one camera that the divorce judge had been manipulated by a vindictive ex-wife. His attorney pulled him away before he could discuss the subpoena. The short statement appeared online within minutes and became the opening line of the gala invitation Bradley's remaining PR contractor circulated that afternoon. CEO Bradley to answer false allegations and announce global recovery plan. He was not merely refusing to accept defeat. He was converting a court loss into marketing material exactly as he had converted our anniversary into an acquisition attempt and Patricia's hospital stay into a press event. The pattern had never changed, only the audience grew larger. Bradley read the documents, then looked toward me. His face showed the first genuine fear I had seen since the restaurant. He was not under arrest yet. That narrow window should have been used to find criminal counsel, stop speaking, and prepare for surrender. Instead, he saw one final weekend and one final gala already booked at the Grand Peninsula Hotel. Foreign investors had not yet heard the full story. If he could obtain a wire transfer before Monday, He believed he could finance an escape or bargain from strength. Nathaniel watched him leave with the agents and his attorney. "He is going to cancel the gala," he said. "No," I replied. Bradley had never canceled a stage on which he expected applause. He would stand beneath the lights, blame me, and ask strangers to fund a company already under court supervision. The divorce decree had ended our marriage. The subpoena outside the courtroom had marked the beginning of the federal reckoning. Bradley walked away with less than 72 hours before his scheduled surrender, and he chose to spend them preparing one last lie. A rational man would have spent the weekend preparing to surrender. Bradley spent it preparing another gala. The Grand Peninsula Hotel had already been reserved for a final international investment event. Most invitees were overseas funds and private investors who had not followed the Chicago court filings. Bradley believed one large wire could finance criminal counsel, replace the frozen operating cash, and restore the appearance of solvency before Monday morning. The Federal Preservation Notice prohibited him from moving disputed investor funds or destroying records, but it did not place him under house arrest. His passport restriction request was pending. He had a narrow legal window, and he mistook procedure for escape. The gala invitation described the event as a global recovery launch and promised confidential access to a distressed but undervalued communications platform. Bradley's remaining contractor had removed the old agency name from some pages and replaced it with a new brand, but the bank instructions still directed money toward accounts controlled by the same corporate shell. The change was cosmetic. He was repainting a condemned building and asking investors to enter before the inspection report arrived. Dominic had forwarded the invitation to the receiver that morning. 2 foreign investors had already signed non-binding letters of intent. No funds had moved, but the presentation package understated debt and described the receiver as a routine restructuring consultant. That misstatement gave the federal team a reason to treat the gala as an active risk, rather than one more act of vanity. The ballroom was dressed in imported white silk and golden light. A jazz quartet played near the stage, while Bradley greeted guests in a tuxedo purchased on credit. His company no longer controlled its former office, its accounts were restricted, and an independent receiver was being installed. Yet he spoke as if the global expansion had already begun. I arrived in a charcoal power suit with Nathaniel and counsel for the receiver. I did not claim to be a government agent. A federal court acting after the SEC's emergency enforcement filing had appointed the receiver to preserve the agency's investor-funded operations. The receiver had retained my firm, and I carried written authorization identifying me as lead forensic accountant for the asset tracing team. The receiver's counsel had coordinated with prosecutors before we entered. My role was limited to explain the accounting, identify assets, and avoid statements about criminal guilt. Nathaniel reminded me that the microphone could become evidence too. Anger might feel satisfying, but precision would survive cross-examination. I repeated the rule to myself as I watched Bradley blame me from the stage. Near the front table, Dominic sat with 2 compliance officers. He had not come for revenge. He came because his fund needed to preserve claims and warn potential investors without spreading unsupported accusations. At the rear, Kylie stood beside her lawyer under the terms of her cooperation. Patricia had not yet arrived. Bradley still believed both women would appear when he called. Hotel security verified the court order and allowed us through. The FBI agents assigned to execute Bradley's arrest warrant waited outside the ballroom until the complaint was unsealed and the lead agent received confirmation to proceed. Bradley stood beneath the spotlight, promising a public relations revolution across 3 continents. I know there have been rumors, he told the audience. My unstable ex-wife has used our divorce to damage my valuation. Her jealousy cannot stop this company. He was trying to raise foreign capital without disclosing the possession order, the receiver, the bank fraud referral, the missing plan assets, or his scheduled surrender. I walked down the center aisle. The click of my heels cut through the room. Investors turned. Bradley saw me and lost his place in the speech. "Jocelyn," he hissed when I reached the stage. "You are trespassing." I handed the hotel manager the receiver's order, then stepped to the microphone. "Good evening." Bradley introduced me as his former wife. That relationship ended in Cook County Court this week, but it is not why I am here. My firm has been retained by the court-appointed receiver in an SEC enforcement matter to trace investor money, preserve assets, and prevent additional loss. I held up the public order. It did not declare Bradley guilty. It authorized the receiver to take control of specified corporate records and accounts while the court examined allegations of securities and financial fraud. Anyone considering an investment tonight should pause contact counsel and review the receiver's notice before sending funds, I said. Bradley's agency is not operating freely. Its primary premises have been surrendered, key accounts are restricted, and material liabilities were omitted from the presentation you received. A representative from one overseas fund raised his hand and asked whether the receiver meant the company was bankrupt. I answered carefully. Insolvency had not yet been finally adjudicated. The current records showed severe liquidity problems, restricted accounts, disputed debts, and missing protected funds. The purpose of the receivership was to preserve what remained and determine the actual position. That answer was less theatrical than calling the company dead, but it was credible. More tablets closed. Bradley tried to laugh. He told the room that every successful company faced temporary litigation and that my appointment proved only that I had friends in government. The receiver's counsel stepped forward and corrected him. I had been retained by the receiver, not appointed as a federal official, and all work was subject to court supervision. Bradley's attempt to discredit me only emphasized that he had misrepresented the order in his own materials. The room changed. Pens stopped moving. Several investors closed wire instructions on their tablets. Bradley rushed toward the microphone. "She is lying," he shouted. "This is a bitter divorce tactic." Nathaniel distributed copies of the order and the receiver's contact information. Investors did not have to choose between spouses. They could verify the case number themselves. I turned to Bradley. "You had 72 hours to obtain counsel and prepare for surrender. Instead, you used that time to solicit money from people who had not been told the truth." His face tightened. "You cannot prove where the money went. That was the final invitation I needed." Behind us, the projection system came under the hotel technician's control. The receiver's encrypted presentation was ready. It contained one slide built from authenticated bank records, plan reconciliations, client ledgers, and recovered communications. I faced the audience again. "You came here to hear about Bradley's future. Before anyone funds it, you deserve to see his past. Not my opinion, not divorce allegations, the receipts." The lights dimmed. The screen turned black, then opened to a map of the money. Bradley lunged for the microphone. "Do not listen to her," he shouted. "She is lying! This is a setup!" I stepped aside and let the room hear him. Panic was more revealing than any insult I could offer. "I am not here to ruin your life," I said. "I am here to present the accounting ordered after the SEC's emergency filing. A federal judge appointed an independent receiver over the agency's investor-funded operations. The receiver retained my firm as lead forensic accountants to trace assets, preserve records, and identify investor money still at risk. I do not possess the power to convict you or personally seize every asset. I possess something you have feared from the beginning, an audited map of where the money went." I moved to the audio-visual desk and inserted an encrypted drive supplied by the receiver. The technician loaded the verified presentation. One slide appeared behind Bradley. It showed incoming capital from Dominic's fund client campaign retainers and employee benefit accounts. Red lines followed the money into 3 categories. The first ended at luxury purchases for Kylie, the Himalayan Birkin Hotel Suites jewelry, and the Porsche deposit. The second ended at transfers connected to Patricia's gambling debt. The third entered shell vendors and accounts used to disguise Bradley's personal withdrawals as marketing and consulting costs. The receiver's report also showed that Bradley had created the illusion of growth by moving the same investor dollars through several affiliated accounts and recording them as new revenue. One deposit appeared 3 times under different campaign names. Another client advance had been transferred to a shell vendor, returned as a consulting rebate, and then counted as operating income. The agency's glossy expansion figures were not merely optimistic. They were built from circular transactions designed to make shrinking cash look like momentum. A second panel listed the employee consequences. Retirement contributions had not reached the planned trust on schedule. Health insurance premiums had been paid late. Payroll taxes were current only because a client retainer had been diverted days before the deadline. The people serving champagne in Bradley's promotional videos had been one missed transfer away from losing benefits while he ordered a birthday ice sculpture for Kylie. Every line carried a transaction date, account identifier, and source exhibit. The slide was simple because the work behind it was not. Bank records had been produced through lawful process. Company servers had been imaged under the receiver's authority. Kylie's phone had been copied with counsel present. The retirement plan administrator and client escrow custodians had reconciled the missing amounts. No one in the room had to trust my anger. They could read the records. Dominic stood from the front table. His face was rigid. "You used our expansion capital to finance your mistress and your mother's debts," he said. Bradley shook his head. "Those were temporary advances. The company owed me compensation." Jocelyn rearranged the numbers. The Receiver's Council distributed a short report to the investors. It separated legitimate salary and reimbursable business expenses from unauthorized personal transfers. Bradley's explanation could not survive the categories. Investors began calling their banks. Those with pending wires placed stop payment requests. Others demanded information about recovering preliminary deposits. I told them claims would be handled through the receiver and the federal court, not by private security or a mob surrounding the stage. The Assistant United States Attorney reminded the room that no investor should confront witnesses or attempt private collection. Several people had already begun shouting that Bradley owed them personally. The prosecutor directed them to the receiver's claims process and warned that disputed assets could not be seized from the hotel. The intervention prevented the climax from becoming another legal absurdity. Anger belonged in statements and claims, not in a circle of wealthy men acting as their own court. Dominic complied first. He instructed his staff to preserve every communication with Bradley and to cooperate with the receiver. His restraint shifted the room. Phones remained out, but the calls became practical cancel pending transfers, preserve confirmations, contact counsel, and notify boards. The chaos Bradley depended on was becoming evidence. Dominic turned to his security chief. "Secure the exits and protect the records. Do not touch Bradley unless he threatens someone." The instruction mattered. Private guards could preserve order, but only law enforcement could execute the warrant. The ballroom doors opened. FBI agents entered with the Assistant United States Attorney, who had waited outside the divorce hearing. The criminal complaint had been unsealed that afternoon after the magistrate approved the warrant. The charges alleged bank fraud, wire fraud, theft and misuse of employee benefit assets, money laundering, and obstruction related to false documents and evidence movement. They were allegations to be proved in court, not convictions announced from a stage. The lead agent approached the podium. "Bradley Abbott, you are under arrest pursuant to a federal warrant. Place your hands behind your back." The microphone captured the click of the handcuffs. Bradley's resistance vanished. He searched the ballroom for an ally and found none. Then he saw Kylie near the rear doors. "Kylie, call the lawyers!" he cried. "Tell them this is false! Help me!" She held a different handbag now, one purchased with her own money, and stood beside the attorney representing her. For a moment she looked at Bradley, as if measuring the distance between the man he claimed to be and the defendant in handcuffs. Her lawyer guided her toward the designated witness exit. Kylie did not run from federal agents, and she did not carry disputed property. She simply refused to answer Bradley. Her cooperation agreement had not promised immunity. It required truthful information, preservation of evidence, and the return of assets while prosecutors evaluated her conduct. Bradley interpreted her silence as abandonment. A broken sound left his throat. Near the entrance, Patricia arrived in a wrinkled blouse with her hair uncombed. Her own lawyer followed, trying to stop her from entering. She had been released after the search of her house and was not under arrest, but her accounts and property were subject to tax and forfeiture proceedings. She saw the slide. Her name appeared beside the gambling transfers she had spent months denying. The country club women investors and reporters she once tried to impress turned toward her. "No," she cried. "Bradley, tell them the payments were loans. Tell them Jocelyn invented this." Bradley could not meet her eyes. The agents led him down the steps. Patricia's knees buckled, and her attorney caught her before she struck the floor. No one mocked her. No one needed to. The empire she had defended as proof of her son's superiority was now a receiver-controlled shell, and the money supporting her social status appeared on a federal evidence chart. The agents paused so Bradley could hear the standard warnings and speak briefly with counsel. He looked at me. "You planned all of this?" he said. "No, I documented what you planned. You chose the transfers, the forged collateral, the stolen files, the false affidavit, and this final solicitation after being ordered to surrender. I only stopped pretending not to see them." He was taken through the center aisle. Investors stepped aside, not like sharks demanding cash from a prisoner, but like people realizing that recovery would require patience, court supervision, and records. The receiver's team collected signed claim forms and warned everyone against deleting messages or moving funds. Patricia tried to reach the aisle as the agents passed, but her attorney held her back. She called my name once, accusing me of destroying a family. I looked at her and remembered the hallway outside the penthouse when she had ordered me to leave my own home and promised that Bradley's company would make him untouchable. I did not repeat the memory aloud. The chart above us already answered her. Nathaniel joined me near the control desk and handed me a copy of the arrest inventory. The agents had taken Bradley's phone, the gala solicitation materials, and the laptop connected to the presentation. The receiver retained the financial records. Each item had a custodian and receipt. 3 months earlier, Bradley believed power meant taking whatever he wanted without reading the paperwork. Now, every object leaving his hands was documented by someone else. I returned to the screen and highlighted one final box projected recovery. The Birkin and other luxury goods had been surrendered. Certain vendor payments were traceable. The bank had stopped the fraudulent loan before funding. Some employee and client money could be restored, though not all losses were yet known. The truth did not promise a perfect ending. It promised an honest accounting. When the agents reached the doors, Bradley turned once more toward Kylie. She had already left with her lawyer. His mother sat in a chair staring at the evidence. Dominic spoke with the receiver about employee payroll rather than revenge. The stage lights still burned above the empty podium. Bradley had arranged them to announce a bright future and blame his former wife. Instead, they illuminated the exact path of every stolen dollar. I powered down the projector. The ballroom darkened and the noise softened into the practical work of statements, evidence receipts, and investor claims. The payoff was not the handcuffs alone, it was the order that replaced chaos. Kylie's gifts became recoverable assets. Patricia's hidden debt became a documented transfer. Bradley's promises became exhibits. The employees he treated as scenery finally had fiduciaries and a receiver protecting their claims. I adjusted the cuffs of my charcoal suit, collected my briefcase, and walked toward the lobby. I did not chase Kylie, insult Patricia, or shout after Bradley. The federal case would continue without my performance. Outside, Chicago air cut through the heat of the hotel. Transport vehicles carried Bradley toward his initial appearance. Reporters called my name, but I referred them to the receiver's public statement and kept walking. For months, Bradley had told everyone that silence meant weakness. That night, silence was the only sound left after the receipts finished speaking. The days following the collapse of his fraudulent empire were marked by a profound, beautiful silence. The frantic phone calls stopped. The aggressive legal threats entirely evaporated. The deafening noise of Bradley's massive, fragile ego was permanently muted, replaced by the efficient, methodical hum of the federal justice system doing exactly what it was designed to do. I did not watch his arraignment on the news. I did not read the breathless society blogs detailing his spectacular downfall. I simply handed my files over to the federal prosecutors and went back to work. It took exactly 2 weeks for his arrogance to completely break down into pathetic, unadulterated desperation. I was sitting at the marble kitchen island in my penthouse, enjoying a quiet Sunday morning when my cell phone rang. The caller identification screen displayed the official incoming number for the Metropolitan Correctional Center in downtown Chicago. I set down my coffee mug. I did not feel a spike of adrenaline or a wave of anxiety. I just felt a cold, clinical curiosity. I accepted the automated prompt from the federal holding facility and waited for the line to connect. Jocelyn Bradley gasped, his voice echoing hollowly over the recorded prison line. He was weeping. It was not the calculated, manipulative performance he had staged in my office with the red roses. It was a raw, ugly, desperate sobbing of a man who had finally realized he was entirely out of options. "Jocelyn, please do not hang up. You have to help me." I leaned back in my chair, resting my hand on the cool marble counter. I did not say a word. I just let the silence stretch, forcing him to fill the empty space with his own panic. "I am so sorry," he cried, his breath hitching wildly. "I was out of my mind. I was sick. I was arrogant and stupid, and I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me. They're talking about 20 years in federal prison, Jocelyn. 20 years. You know the prosecutors. You know the judges. You have the financial leverage to make this go away. Please, I am begging you. I will do anything. I will sign anything you want. I will spend the rest of my life making this up to you. Just please, save me." He was offering me absolute submission. He was promising to be the devoted, obedient husband if I would just use my power to unlock his cage. 5 years ago, I might have felt a shred of pity for the man I thought I had married. But that man never actually existed. The man weeping on the other end of the line was just a parasite who had finally run out of hosts to drain. I took a slow, steady breath, projecting my voice with absolute lethal clarity. "You sat across from me at a Michelin star restaurant, Bradley," I said, my tone completely devoid of any sympathy or anger. "You threw a stack of divorce papers onto the table with a smug smile. You told me to sign them because you were ready for a brand new life with your new family. You were incredibly eager to leave me behind with absolutely nothing." "Jocelyn, please," he begged, a fresh wave of sobs breaking through his voice. "I did not mean it. I was blind." I did not let him interrupt. "I gave you exactly what you asked for, Bradley." I continued slicing through his pathetic apologies. "You wanted a new life, and I handed it to you on a silver platter. I highly recommend you stop crying and start learning how to enjoy your new life behind bars." "No, wait, Jocelyn, please!" he screamed, true terror ripping through the receiver. I pressed the red button on my screen, instantly terminating the call. The connection went dead. I opened my settings and permanently blocked the incoming routing number for the Federal Correctional Facility. The transaction was officially closed. The ledger was perfectly zeroed out. I picked up my coffee mug and took a sip, letting the absolute quiet of my beautiful, multi-million-dollar penthouse wash over me. 6 months later, the harsh Chicago winter had melted away, giving rise to a brilliant, crisp spring morning. I stepped out of the private elevator and walked into the grand reception area of my new corporate headquarters. The space was completely unrecognizable from the tacky, arrogant monument Bradley had built. The gaudy waterfall wall displaying his public relations logo had been entirely demolished. In its place stood a sleek, minimalist wall of dark slate featuring the brushed steel lettering of my own firm, Apex Horizon Forensic Auditing. As the legal landlord of the commercial property, I had officially executed the eviction and seized the abandoned space. When the dust settled, I moved my own rapidly expanding financial firm into the top 2 floors of the premium high-rise. I did not just take his house, I took his throne. My assistant greeted me with a warm, professional smile, handing me a tablet loaded with the morning briefings. The agency was thriving. Dr. Gregory, the dean of the medical school, had officially signed a massive, multi-year contract with our firm. Dominic, the venture capitalist, had retained my personal services to audit his entire investment portfolio. The business was generating legitimate, clean revenue at an unprecedented scale. I walked down the main corridor, passing the glass-walled bullpen, where dozens of elite accountants and cybersecurity experts were already hard at work. The atmosphere was focused, respectful, and driven by genuine excellence. There were no toxic egos. There were no terrified junior employees waiting for a narcissistic chief executive officer to throw a tantrum. I had built an empire grounded in absolute integrity. I pushed open the heavy oak door to my corner office, the exact same office where Bradley had once tried to intimidate me with his hired security guards. I had completely gutted the room. The cheap, flashy decor was replaced with rich mahogany custom bookshelves and modern art that I had personally selected. I walked over to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sprawling city below. The view was breathtaking. The sun was reflecting off the glass towers of the financial district, casting a golden hue over the bustling streets. I walked over to a small crystal decanter sitting on my side table. I poured myself a single glass of vintage champagne. The bubbles rose rapidly to the surface, catching the morning light. I took a sip and let champagne settle on my tongue. The criminal cases were complete. Bradley had pleaded guilty to federal bank fraud, wire fraud, theft involving employee benefit assets, and money laundering. After a pre-sentence investigation, the judge imposed a 15-year federal sentence, restitution, forfeiture, and supervised release. Federal law did not offer ordinary parole. Any credit or placement decision belonged to the Bureau of Prisons. Patricia entered a plea addressing tax offenses and unlawful gambling proceeds received, home detention, and lost luxury assets through court-ordered liquidation. She moved into a modest apartment after losing the country club life she valued. Kylie completed truthful cooperation, surrendered disputed property, and left Chicago after prosecutors resolved her role. None of them disappeared through magic. Each consequence followed records hearings, negotiated pleas, and judicial orders. They had all conspired to tear my life apart, assuming my silence was a symptom of weakness. They had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of a woman who spends her life analyzing the truth hidden beneath the numbers. I held my champagne glass up toward the spectacular Chicago skyline, offering a silent toast to the city that had witnessed my complete resurrection. There was no longer a heavy burden resting on my shoulders. There were no more lies to navigate, no more manipulations to dodge, no more shrinking myself to accommodate the fragile ego of a mediocre man. The sweetest revenge was never about shouting or throwing glasses or trying to publicly humiliate the people who betrayed me. The sweetest, most devastating revenge was taking back the empire that rightfully belonged to me. It was upgrading my life, my environment, and my entire reality to a level they could never possibly touch. I was 33 years old. I was the sole owner of a multi-million-dollar penthouse. I was the founder and chief executive officer of the most elite forensic accounting firm in the city. I was standing on top of the world, and the view was absolutely flawless. I took one final sip of my champagne, turned my back on the window, and walked to my desk, ready to conquer the day. The most powerful lesson from Jocelyn's journey is that true strength lies in calm, calculated resilience rather than emotional reactivity. When faced with betrayal and manipulation, it is easy to let anger take control. However, Jocelyn teaches us that the ultimate response to toxicity is protecting your own peace and securing your independence. Instead of engaging in petty arguments or stooping to her husband's level, she focused on the facts, set ironclad boundaries, and let his own actions be his undoing. This story reminds us that our self-worth isn't defined by how others treat us or the false narratives they create. Real power is found in building a life of integrity, standing firmly in your truth, and focusing your energy on your own growth and success. Take a moment today to reflect on your own boundaries and commit to prioritizing your personal growth over anyone else's toxic